Now proceed to read the orders of the day.
King's Speech. Motion for an address. Adjourned debate on question.
Now.
The question is that a humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. I call Secretary of State Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to open today's King's Speech debate on behalf of His Majesty's Government, and it's an honour of my life to address this House for the first time as the Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have been given a mandate by the British people to turn a page on 14 years of chaos and start a new chapter that they deserve. That began with this week's speech. But it's not the words we offer, it is the action. Because I know firsthand how government can change lives for the better. I say that not as a politician, but as someone whose own life was changed for the better by the last Labour government. And I am determined to do the same for others. That is why we have set out a bold vision to smash the class ceiling and to get Britain building. To improve the quality and standard of life for everyone and everywhere across our country. So let me give a huge welcome to all the new members on these benches who have been crucial to delivering that programme of national renewal. But I also extend a welcome to the new members opposite too. We will disagree on much, I'm sure, but we all share the honour and the privilege of representing those who sent us here. So I wish the very best to all and any honourable member who is making their maiden speech today. Just over 9 years ago, when I made my maiden speech on behalf of the people of Ashton-under-Lyne, I pledged that I will always tell it as it is. And I think that's one promise that I've kept to. Now I intend to fulfil another, because we promise the people of this country we will serve their interests and not ours. That starts by having the honesty to say that we will not be able to put right the mess of the past 14 years immediately, but after just 2 weeks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have already made a difference. Creating a national wealth fund to grow our economy, scrapping the failed Rwanda plan, lifting the near decade-long ban on onshore wind, and starting work on the 40,000 extra NHS appointments that people need each week, and the 700,000 urgent dental appointments up and running too. Resuming and expanding teacher recruitment, and in my department, the newly renamed Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, we will replace slogans with substance. We are getting back to the real work of governing in the national interest. We have already taken early steps to unblock our planning system, creating a new task force to accelerate stalled housing sites in our country, beginning with 4 that alone could deliver more than 14,000 of the homes Britain so desperately needs. Because, Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis is holding Britain back. Too many families face soaring mortgage payments or sky-high rents for damp, unsafe homes. Or the leaseholders trapped facing eye-watering charges with no way out. All of this has been fuelled by the chronic housing shortage after the last government failed to meet their housing targets every single year. Housing completions are now set to hit their lowest level since the World War II. So we know we have a mountain to climb. That is why we are already taking the first steps, starting with an overhaul of our planning system, a reform that will both help homes build the homes we need and speed up the infrastructure to support them. We are committed not just to an ambitious target for overall housing building, but the biggest wave of social and affordable housing for a generation. It's a promise which we will bring back with meaningful housing targets. And it is right that local people have a say on what kind of houses are built and where, because our aim is not to build big, but build well. We will work with local government to plan new housing in the best possible places with the infrastructure, public services and green spaces they need. Because I believe that social housing must be there when you need it, and affordable housing to own should be there when you want it. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for giving way and congratulate her on her new role. My local councils in South Staffordshire and Dudley have worked hard to prepare local plans that provide the housing that they've assessed that the local community needs whilst protecting key greenbelt. Is she really going to tear up plans that have either been adopted or are in the formal process of being adopted if her bureaucrats feel that their assessment is better than the local council's?
Well, I welcome the honourable gentleman's comments, and the point of what we're trying to do is, and I congratulate the local authorities that have got those local plans, because if they're adopted, that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see more local plans and more engagement with local leaders to build the houses that people want in their area, working together with them. And he talked about the green belt. We've been very clear on the grey belt as well. We won't get the housing we need just from the brownfield sites, but brownfield will be first. But we will work with local leaders, because the mandate that the British people gave us at this election was we've got to get the housing Britain needs. And I'm afraid the last Tory government didn't take this issue on and has failed people, and we've got a chronic housing shortage in this country. And everyone should have a place to call home, and we will legislate to make that happen. Mr Deputy Speaker, our Renters' Rights Bill will give protection and security for tenants as well for responsible landlords, levelling the playing field. We will plug the gaps left by the last government's Leasehold Act, tackling unregulated and unaffordable ground rents and strengthening the leaseholders' rights. And our planning and infrastructure bill will provide the extra homes we need, unblock those stalled sites, development sites, and unveil the next generation of new towns.
I thank her for giving way. My constituency, Runnymede and Weybridge, has vast swathes of high-risk flood area, zone 2 and 3. And we see this with flooding every year, most notably in 2014, but also in the January flooding. Will her planning reforms protect our areas of high risk of flooding so that they're protected and not built on, they're making our flooding situation worse?
We've got a lot of speakers to get through, some maiden speakers, so I do urge front benches, shorter speeches and fewer interventions. Otherwise, we're not going to get through these maiden speakers.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I will take your advice, and apologies for not taking more interventions. But look, we've got to grapple with these issues and work with areas, and obviously flooding has been a major issue, and our government will look at that because, you know, it is very devastating to people whose homes are flooded, and we have to take that in the round when looking at planning as well. So we will unveil the next generation of new towns, and we will learn the lessons of the past to create safe and beautiful homes and sustainable green communities of the future. This government is fully committed to the 13 targets set under the Environmental Act of 2021, and will work closely with my honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, to ensure that we also protect the environment and nature. And we will work with local leaders to ensure the towns meet our gold standard of being 40% genuinely affordable housing with homes for social rent a priority. In some places, we will extend and regenerate urban areas so everyone will benefit from better public transport and extra public services. We are building not just homes, but communities. Our first protocol will be brownfield land, so previously used land will be developed first wherever possible and sites fast-tracked. But brownfield development alone will not meet the country's increasing urgent needs. The Green Belt was designed for England in the middle of the 20th century. It is right to keep that principle, but make it relevant to today. That is why we will release lower quality, grey belt sites, disused car parks and garages and ugly wastelands to meet the needs of 2024. Our golden rules will require developers to enhance local nature and public access to green spaces and provide the local services for communities' everyday needs like schools and GP surgeries. We will also reverse the damaging set changes that the last government made last December. While they backtracked in front of vested interest and scrapped mandatory housing targets, Labour will govern in the national interest and take the tough choices to get Britain building. We will do so in an updated national planning policy framework by the end of this month, because the current system just isn't working, not for housing at a local level and not for projects at a national level. The data centres, labs and research sites which should unleash a modern economy, not to mention large-scale projects which help improve the environment. Onshore wind is the cheapest form of electricity going, but planning policy has effectively banned it for nearly a decade. We're starting it up again. And we will go further. As part of our plan for cheaper household bills and achieve net zero, we're taking the brakes off the planning system. In the first 3 months of this year, just a fifth of major applications were determined within the 13-week period. And as for nationally significant infrastructure, Mr Deputy Speaker, the average time for consent is now over 4 years compared to 2.5 as recently as 2021. Our bill will speed up and streamline the process from start to finish. It will modernise planning committees and increase the capacity of our local planning authorities. And by reforming compulsory purchase, it will support land assembly for development in the public interest. We will unblock new grid connections, roads, railways, reservoirs, a game-changing reforms for national renewal. Mr Deputy Speaker, the leaders of our communities are the best placed to take forward that mission. And I was delighted to invite our mayors to Downing Street, days into a Labour government with the Prime Minister. They represent our biggest cities and our most beautiful countryside, and I know only too well of the diverse challenges that our people need to overcome. Of course, there are now Labour mayors. There's now so many Labour mayors that I think I've lost count of how many we actually have. But I also noted the positive words from Ben Houchen about the constructive engagement local leaders have already experienced under this new government. Along with their local citizens, we will give them a bigger say on how to transform their neighbourhoods and high streets. We will hand them the powers to transform their regions to become the best places for people to live, work and enjoy. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are under no illusion about the hard yards needed to repair the economic and social damage the last government left behind. As my right honourable friend the Chancellor has said, we have the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Back then it was Labour that rebuilt Britain from the rubble of war, creating the NHS, the welfare state and council homes for our returning heroes. And it is now that it will be a Labour government that rebuilds Britain once again.
Shadow Secretary of State, Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is a delight to be back at the dispatch box, and I've been looking forward to speaking opposite the Right Honourable Lady for a very, very long time. She and I have never really met, certainly never spoken to each other, despite being in this house together for 7 years. We have some things in common, not much. We were both born in 1980, although I'm older and wiser than she is. People often think we're both much younger than we really are, because we've got such great skin and good hair. And we're both known as being quite feisty. So I'm really pleased to be able to congratulate her on her elevation to Secretary of State and Deputy Prime Minister. This is a phenomenal achievement. She will be a great inspiration to young people, but particularly young women in many communities across the country. And I think that's a wonderful thing. That's the sort of Britain we are, where people who grow up from all walks of life can reach the top. It's an extraordinary story, dare I say, of Conservative success. Because unlike me, she grew up under a Conservative government with a welfare state that provided a safety net, a strong economy and opportunity, while I mostly grew up in Nigeria under a socialist military government that used a lot of the rhetoric that I've heard her promote when she was sitting on this side of the House. So she may not credit Conservatives for what she has achieved, but we'll be taking some of that credit anyway. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to her on her first outing as a minister in the chamber, because it's only going to be downhill from here. You see, the thing is, I've been a Secretary of State before, and after 5 years as a minister, you learn a thing or two about government that you never can in opposition. I've been there, done it, and I can tell the Right Honourable Lady that she has been stitched up. It is quite clear that the bills and policies from the King's speech she's just referenced have not been written by her, but by the Chancellor and the Chancellor's advisers. We all know this because we watched the member for Leeds West announce them in far more detail in her speech last week. And all the stuff the Secretary of State worked on in opposition, like her new deal for workers, has been taken off her and given to the Business Secretary. So I'm sorry to tell the Right Honourable Lady that her colleagues, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and their many advisers have written a manifesto and made promises that are not deliverable, and they've hung them around her neck and said, Angie, you go out there and you sell it. I'm sad to see many of her shadow team not sitting beside her as ministers. They worked for free, grinding in opposition for years, only to watch the children of the chosen ones get the ministerial cars and salaries before their maiden speeches are written. Wow.
Golden tickets.
Sue Gray was a lot nicer to me when she worked in my department. I think we know who's in charge, and it's not the Right Honourable Lady. She's been stitched up. They've made her the fall guy. They've promised 1.5 million houses by the end of this Parliament. That's over 800 houses per day, and we're already 2 weeks in. And as she goes on, day after day, she's going to realise that a backlog is building and there's no way out. But I want her to know that I'm here for her. I'll be here to hold her hand and walk her through what is likely to be a very difficult time. I may even give her some tips, because having worked in that department, I know what needs to be done. I know what we should have done that we didn't do, and I know that they're going to make the same mistakes. It's not that 1.5 million homes by the end of this Parliament is unachievable. It's that it's going to require the sort of systemic change which they are not ready for. I know they're not ready because of how they voted in the last Parliament and how they campaigned in their own constituencies. I'm not going to read out the long list of all the cabinet members who've been opposing planning in their backyard, including the housing minister. Many of them have been thinking that they get into government and concrete over lots of Tory constituencies. 3 weeks ago, just 15% of the Greenbelt was in Labour constituencies. Now it's 50%. They aren't Tory constituencies now, they are Labour. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would say, yes, they are Labour. They are Labour. I would say to members opposite, they are now your voters and your electorate, and you're going to have to tell them that you're going to do something that many of you promised locally that you would never do not that long ago. But it mostly won't be the problem of the Cabinet, who will look after themselves. It'll be the backbenchers, all those bright, shiny faces I see sitting behind the Right Honourable Lady, who are really excited to be here. They haven't started getting those angry emails we've been replying to for 14 years. Many of those voters on whom their narrow and slim majorities now rely will be writing to them. So in the spirit of sisterly support, I'm going to let her know what's going to happen over the next few weeks and months. And they're looking so nervous right now, I can tell. They look very nervous. Let me tell the Right Honourable Lady, she's going to get a period of consultation that's going to take this long. And then she's going to have to respond to that consultation. And that'll take this long, assuming that nothing goes wrong with either of those processes. So we reached December, January, 6 months have passed, and that is 10% of the Parliament, where you haven't built any extra homes. So at this point, she'll be running 500 homes behind the target every single day, and they wouldn't have started building properly. The honourable gentleman is trunching from a sedentary position that you wait and see. We have seen, we've been there, we know, you don't. And as it becomes clear in these new Labour constituencies, for which congratulations, these new Labour constituencies in the Greenbelt, as it becomes clear to their voters what's happening, those MPs are going to receive a lot more emails. I mean, a lot more. They're going to want a lot of public meetings because they will know that the decisions which she announced are now being taken out of local hands and made by central government. And the only way that they can register their concern is by appealing to their local MPs, who will all be appealing to her. But this is what being in power is. Government is about making difficult decisions. Opposition is easy. We've been watching Labour do it for 14 years, and they have spent all the time telling the people of this country that they will do better. So here's the record that they are going to have to beat. We built 1 million new homes in the course of the last Parliament while safeguarding the Green Belt. 2.5 million since 2010, despite COVID. We delivered 700,000 new affordable homes. Over 172,000 of those were for social rent. We put in place £11.5 billion affordable homes programme. Does she even know yet if the Chancellor will give her up to £11.5 billion? Because she's going to need a lot more than that if she's going to beat our record. And let's not forget what Labour did just last year. We had a majority in this House, but not in the other place, where they whipped Labour lords to vote against an amendment on nutrient neutrality, using new Brexit powers to unlock 160,000 homes. Many of those new members didn't see that happening. They're going to find it shocking. We legislated for that. They blocked it. Destructive opposition. Are they going to reverse that decision? I have a feeling they won't. And that's why I'm worried about the Right Honourable Lady. Is she going to be able to face down her backbenchers, or will Labour carry on not doing the things that you have to do in order to build homes? Thank you. Let's look at the Labour record. In the year to June 2009, she talks about what happened at the last World War. In the year to June 2009, when everybody here was alive, when they were last in government, they only built 75,000 new homes, the lowest level of house building since the 1920s. And what are they going to do? What are they doing where they currently are in government? In London, Sadiq Khan has failed to hit his own targets, beginning just 21,000 new homes in 2022, despite us giving him pots and pots of money. We were forced to intervene on his house building failures. Why hasn't he built on all those car parks that she was talking about in her speech? In Wales, the Labour administration promised to deliver 20,000 new homes for social rent by 2026. They've barely delivered a quarter. The Right Honourable Lady may pretend building homes is easy, but Labour know it's not easy because they failed in London and they failed in Wales, and they are already making new mistakes. We all know that immigration increases housing demand. Just this week, we heard that they're going to be fast-tracking 90,000 illegal immigrants who already landed here. If they are permitted to stay, they will require permanent housing. We put the Rwanda scheme in place to limit illegal immigration. They've scrapped it. So with no plans whatsoever to tackle the problem, has she got 90,000 homes ready for the people her Home Secretary is going to be fast-tracking through? If not, she's already 90,000 homes down on the target the Prime Minister has set for her. So that's why I'm feeling very generous towards the Right Honourable Lady, because she has been stitched up, she's going to need some friends, and I want her to know that we're all here for her. Some people think opposition is about throwing mud across the chamber or calling your opponent scum. But often it's about saying I told you so. And I want to reassure the Right Honourable Lady that I will be here to say I told you so when these targets are missed. We, of course, will be a constructive opposition. We want to see homes built in the right places with the right infrastructure. We are here to help. I doubt the same can be said of the biggest local NIMBYs in the country, the Liberal Democrats. I'm not sure if they're there or not. There are many more of them now, you wouldn't know, but there are, usually elected on promises not to build anything anywhere in their communities. In the last Parliament, I watched them oppose planning reforms on permitted development, reforms that have allowed us to build on land that was already in use. It'll be very interesting to see how they square their NIMBY tendencies with their manifesto promises. But then again, saying one thing and doing another has never bothered the Liberal Democrats. She's not going to get any help from them, but we're here for her. I've heard some of Labour's plans. Introducing mandatory targets while introducing new regulatory costs won't work. Without taxpayer funding, their affordable housing targets are unviable. Where's that money going to come from? The mandate they want to enforce implies a consequence for missing the target. What will that consequence be for local councils? Are they going to scrap neighbourhood plans that communities have put together to deliver more homes, as my honourable friend said? What will those councils say when they're forced to do things they promised they wouldn't do just 8 weeks ago? So we've heard from Labour in the speeches that have been given that they will bring in those mechanisms for overriding local decision-making to identify the land for development. That's fine. But identifying land doesn't mean that homes or infrastructures will be built. So I look forward to second reading of her bill, where she will have to explain the plans that the Chancellor and her SPADs have written up for the Right Honourable Lady, and she can tell us in great technical detail how they will be delivered, although I suspect she will leave the tricky stuff to her junior ministers. So we Conservatives may not be as many as we used to be, but we still know all the stuff that we learned over 14 years as we delivered 2.5 million homes. We know where the difficulties are, we know the technicalities. She is just learning, and we're going to be ready and waiting to show that she and her party have made promises they cannot keep, and in many cases have no idea what they are doing. To conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Labour have a tough act to follow, but imitation is the sincerest. They do, but imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I'm pleased to see that they have been copying and pasting many of the policies that we had in government. They've been copying and pasting what we do. We introduced metro mayors with substantial powers. Now they're announcing they're going to do more. We put billions of levelling up funding into communities, backing metro mayors like Ben Harch. And let's see if Labour will follow this for all their new mayors. In the last local government finance settlement, we made £64.7 billion available for local authorities, a 7.5% increase in cash terms. Let's see if Labour tops that, rather than just moving money from one part of the country to another. We would like to see them get the Holocaust Memorial Bill, which we started, onto the statute books, as the Prime Minister promised. We will support them in that. We must do right by our Jewish communities. We provided record levels of funding to protect them from harm and extremism. We took decisive action to tackle growing sectarianism and are disappointed not to see any mention of how Labour will continue this in the King's Speech. This election, we saw independent MPs win seats off Labour on the back of sectarianism and integration failures, a problem Labour continually denies exists even as we are watching riots in Leeds. It is time to put the childish displays and fake outrage that they have been showing away. The Right Honourable Lady will need to get very serious very quickly, and where she has the right ambition, we will do what we can to support her in facing down those members sitting behind her who still don't get it.
Order. I shall next call Bambos Charalambous, but before I do so, I shall say that because we're trying to get as many people as possible in, I shall have to impose a 7-minute time limit on all backbench speakers, and I will urge maiden speakers who will not have a formal time limit on them to also stick to that sort of limit. Obviously the time limit doesn't apply to the Lib Dem spokesman, but I know that she will try and be brief. I now call Bambos Charalambous.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I want to start by saying it's a pleasure to see my right honourable friend in her rightful place as Deputy Prime Minister. It's also a pleasure to speak in this King's Speech debate, the first debate under a focused mission-led Labour government. And I wish to record my thanks to the constituents of Southgate and Wood Green in putting their faith in me to represent them as the first Member of Parliament for this newly configured constituency. The legislative programme in the King's Speech shows that the government is determined to get cracking with the legislation needed for a long-term national renewal, and nowhere more so than in housing. The shortage of both private and social housing is a huge problem across the country. Families and children often waiting years in temporary accommodation, which may no longer be suitable, and many young people unable to afford a deposit on a new home, the price of which has far outstripped earnings in recent years, forcing them either to have to stay at home with their parents or living in precarious shared accommodation. Another scandal is the high level of no-fault-based evictions, which is also adding to the pressures on local authorities to house homeless people. And it's for these reasons that I welcome the proposed Renters' Rights Bill, which will abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions and strengthen tenants' rights and protections to challenge rent increases, among other things. I also welcome the proposed planning infrastructure bill, because we need to get on with house building so that people can get on with their lives and not have their lives put on hold because of unaffordability. Yeah. We need to build more, and we need to build them in the right places and ensure that there is no adverse impact on local services and that the design and specification is to a high standard. The types of houses built should conform with the needs of the local community, with more family-sized houses needed urgently. We also need more council houses, and I applaud the efforts of both Enfield and Harriet Council in my constituency in building more council houses, but more needs to be done, and I encourage the government to support councils in any way they can so that more council houses are built.
Absolutely.
To build more houses, we need a highly skilled local workforce, which is why I welcome the measures in the proposed Skills England Bill, which will identify national and local skills needs and ensure that those needs are being aligned and met. Turning now to other elements in the King's Speech, we all need to ensure that our communities are safe, and that is why I welcome the measures in the proposed Crime and Policing Bill, which will give the police and law enforcement new powers to tackle antisocial behaviour and also to tackle retail crime, focusing in particular on attacks on shop workers and low-level shoplifting, and small and medium-sized local businesses, which are the lifeblood of our local high streets, are now seriously impacted by even low-level crime. So we need to make sure that they're supported and that law enforcement takes seriously all reported retail crime. Knife crime has a terrible, devastating effect on the lives of families and of friends of victims. And I find it shocking and sad that the perpetrators are often the same age as the victims. And that is why I'm also pleased to see that tougher sanctions will be introduced to ban ninja swords and other lethal blades, whilst also tackling the criminal gangs who exploit children for criminal purposes. And it's also good to see that there will be support for teenagers at risk of being drawn into crime. On a personal level, I'm delighted to see that the Tobacco and Vapes Bill will be reintroduced in this Parliament. I have the privilege of serving on the Bill Committee for the Tobacco and Vapes Bill earlier this year, and cross-party support and unity in seeking to progressively ban the sale of tobacco products forever, making the UK world leader in this area of public health, was a joy to see. And I wish to put on record my thanks to the contributions of my honourable friend, the member for Badenoch Edgbaston, and also Dame Andrea Letson for the excellent bipartisan work they did to progress the bill as far as they did before it fell as a result of the general election being called. And I sincerely hope that this time it progresses to royal assent. The final bill I wish to comment on is the draft Equality, Race and Disability Bill, which will enshrine in law the full right to equal pay for ethnic minorities and disabled people, and introduce mandatory ethnicity and disability pay reporting for larger companies. I sincerely hope that where there is any disparity, that the employers take the appropriate action to address their failings and close the gap. The King's Speech is an exciting beginning for the Labour government, which is keen to make a real difference to people's lives, including my constituents in Southgate and Wood Green. The starting gun for national renewal has been fired, and having got off to a flying start, I hope that this pace of change continues and that we see positive, long-lasting benefits in housing, community safety, health and equality for all. Thank you.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Deputy Prime Minister and welcome her to her place, and I welcome the Shadow Secretary of State as well. And because we're talking about local government today, declare my interest as a Vice President of the Local Government Association. Now, the topic of today's debate, easy for me to say, is planning, greenbelt and rural affairs. And we do need to talk about planning and housing, and I will certainly do that. But we also need to talk about rural affairs, and I'm slightly confused as to why none of the front bench speeches have done that so far. I will start by saying I welcome the government's focus on house building and the reintroduction of housing targets. In England, the number of people left languishing on the social housing waiting list has reached 1.2 million. There are 8.5 million people in this country with some form of unmet housing need. Last year, under the Conservative government, 29,000 social homes were sold or demolished, fewer than 7,000 were built. So we all know that we have an unprecedented need for new housing, and particularly for social housing. Liberal Democrats have had an ambitious commitment to social housing, which is to build 150,000 social homes per year by the end of this parliamentary term, because the lack of social housing feeds through. The gentleman is muttering from a sedentary position. He might wish to know that my grandparents lived in social housing, and I have no particular prejudices against it whatsoever. We're committed also not only to building that homes which are so important to the whole housing market, to easing the crisis throughout the whole housing market, but we're also committed to ensuring that those new homes are of a high standard, that they are zero carbon, and that they are built in a way with proper infrastructure that provides communities with the services and amenities they need. Integrating public delivery has got to be part of the planning process. So we welcome in principle the government's plans to streamline the delivery for critical infrastructure, including in the housing sector, in the forthcoming planning and infrastructure bill. But we need to be clear that the current system has only benefited developers rather than communities, and the new bill must take that into account. Crude targets alone have led to many developments being given permission only for affordable and social housing elements to be watered down once permission is granted on the basis of viability, and that must change. We know that local authorities are best placed to make the decisions about local housing in their areas, so I would urge the government to ensure that their mandatory housing targets are built from the bottom up, determining the type of housing that those communities need and the type of infrastructure that they need to go with them, including empowering local government to build social homes where they are most needed. Yeah. We need the necessary infrastructure, like GPs, like schools, like bus stops and bus routes, while also ensuring there's appropriate green space and access to the countryside, because that's also important for health and well-being. And our experience is that residents support good plans with good infrastructure. Now, we'll use the term NIMBY today, I would imagine, in this debate, and it's already been used about the Liberal Democrats. But it's not appropriate to approve housing in areas which are unsuitable, for example, where there's a high risk of flooding. It's not being a NIMBY to oppose poor planning, it is common sense. Local authorities are under enormous pressure and their planning departments are overstretched, as we know, and I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's comments on that point. They need proper funding to make sure that they make good and consistent decisions and that their councillors are well advised. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way on that point. When she makes the point about infrastructure making decisions in the best interests of our communities, can I ask why the Liberal Democrat Council of Rutland this week turned down an application for a new daycare centre for people with special educational needs without even taking it to the planning committee, meaning that we now have to rely on their service rather than giving people the choice they need to ensure that anyone with learning disabilities or disabilities in our community gets the support they need?
Well, I thank her for her comments. I don't know the details of the individual case that she's raised, but we need to ensure that those planning departments are properly funded so that the decisions made by planning officers are appropriate. And without knowing the details, it may be a good development, it may be a poor one, and they need to be given the empowerment to make those decisions correctly. Now, we know that some proposals for development are inappropriate and in some cases downright dangerous. So we mentioned earlier the building of houses on floodplains. The only insurer to reinsure houses on floodplains is due to close its operations in 15 years' time. We can't build houses on floodplains. They won't be able to be insured and they won't be able to be sold. We will trap homeowners into them. And we shouldn't be building housing developments without additional schools or GP surgeries. And most importantly, we shouldn't be building housing developments where the developers don't prepare the roads and green spaces to an acceptable standard, don't allow them to be adopted by the local authority, set up a shared management company and leave the homeowners there fleeced for the rest of their home ownership experience. So I would really encourage the Secretary of State to consider that in her forthcoming legislation. Good councillors approve good planning legislation, and that's good planning development, and that's why on the days when the Conservatives aren't accusing us of being NIMBYs, they're telling people that we're going to concrete over their countryside. Now, planning isn't just about housing. We have many demands on our countryside: housing, renewable energy, nature restoration, and importantly, the growing of food. So we need to simplify planning so that all of these things can happen. Housing and renewable energy and job creation are incredibly important, but I need to urge the government to ensure that that is not at the expense of food production. Liberal Democrats have called for a land use strategy to be developed so that these importing and competing demands can be balanced and that we use the land in an optimal way so that we're protecting the highest grade arable land for food production and putting the infrastructure of renewable energy and housing in less prime places. So I hope the government will consider a land use strategy as part of its planning reform. And this brings me on to another important area of the countryside, our waterways and our beaches, and the scandal of raw sewage being allowed to be dumped into our rivers and beaches, while water company executives have taken home huge bonuses, and their often overseas shareholders have taken huge dividends. Liberal Democrats are proud to have led the campaign to end the sewage crisis, and we welcome the Water Regulation Special Measures Bill. We'll be watching closely to ensure that the water regulator is given the powers it needs to finally end this sewage outrage. Now, moving on to rural affairs. there wasn't a mention in the King's speech to rural communities or priorities for the countryside. And I hope this means that the new government will be ensuring that every policy is rural-proofed and that the demands of delivering public services in rural areas where the population is spread out over a large area are being considered. I also want to mention the English Devolution Bill. Liberal Democrats are the proud voices of local communities and community-led politics, and we absolutely welcome steps to devolve power away from Westminster. But I would ask the Secretary of State to confirm what that is going to look like for those councils without a Devo deal or without a Metro Mayor or Combined Authority Mayor. It's important that all local councils have the powers and the funding to deliver for their communities, and that the funding must reflect the cost of delivering services in rural areas. Rural councils have been taken for granted for far too long, and we need to be ensuring that people who live in rural areas who are also seeing increases in their council tax are getting the public services that they deserve too. Now, in rural areas, the rurality affects the delivery of all types of service, and I just want to touch on a few key areas. Health is an important issue in my North Shropshire constituency, where we've seen huge problems with GP access, with dentistry access, and with a crisis in our A&E service. So while I welcome the government's plans to tackle the crisis in mental health service provision, which is also a big problem in rural areas, we really want to see a rural-focused policy to deal with the recruitment crisis in rural areas and the cost of delivering health services over large distances. And in many ways, ensuring that people who live a long way from their hospital or their diagnostic centre can travel to that place more easily. And that brings me on as well to public transport. Now, public transport is really quite problematic in Shropshire. We've lost 63% of our bus miles since 2015, and it's very difficult for anybody to access work opportunities, social opportunities, education opportunities, and indeed health services. And I'm really pleased to see that the government is going to allow local authorities to franchise their own bus services, something that Liberal Democrats have long called for. But I would like to see the detail of how that's going to work and how we're going to get the funding to kickstart those routes and get Labour moving properly around our countryside.
Remarks to close, please.
Yes, of course. I was briefly going to mention mobile signal, which I will brush over because I have talked about that a reasonable amount in this House. I also want to talk about farming and the rural economy because it is the backbone of our economy, and food production is extremely important. Farmers have faced a crisis over the last few years. The botched introduction of the Environmental Land Management Scheme, the input costs that they face, and the fact that vast tracts of farmland are underwater and have been for the last 18 months. I must encourage the government to look at trade deals and ensure that farmers work on a levelling playing field, that the sustainable farming incentive is dealing with this consistent problem of flooding following prolonged rainfall, and that our farmers are storing an enormous amount of water upstream. I will draw my remarks to a close because I'm keen to hear the maiden speeches of all these new members who I welcome to this place. But I'd just like to reinforce the points that I've made. Community-led planning is so important. We'd love to see a land use strategy. We need to make sure that the cost of delivering public services in rural areas is properly considered and funded, and the infrastructure needs to be there. And finally, please don't forget about food security. It is so important to national renewal. Thank you.
Maiden speech, Sharon Rushworth.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for allowing me this opportunity to make my maiden speech during the King's Speech debate. And may I also thank the Honourable Member for Southgate and Wood Green for his excellent contribution, and also the Honourable Member for North Shropshire. Like her, I represent a rural constituency, and many of the issues that she has just raised I recognise in my own community. I also want to thank my predecessor, Deanna Davison, for her service. In her maiden speech, she described Bishop Auckland as England's most beautiful constituency, and on that point we agree. She's a formidable campaigner who did important work raising awareness about migraines, lobular cancer and the danger of one-punch assaults. And while she already has the accolade of being the first ever Conservative MP for Bishop Auckland, I hope in decades to come that her legacy will be even more impressively that she was the only ever Conservative MP for Bishop Auckland. If this House would indulge me a moment, I'd like to say a little about the place that I call home, the people who live there and what makes them so special. Now, getting my priorities in order, I'll start with talking about football. I had been looking forward this summer to being able to sing one general election and one European Cup, but that wasn't to be. I'm so gutted that our England team didn't quite make it, but in 1909, football did come home as West Auckland became the first football team to win the World Cup. And that's true, you can look it up. Another important footballing moment came in 1958 when the Bishop Auckland Amateur Football Club famously provided players to Manchester United to help them fulfil fixtures after the Munich air disaster. But what really touched me was meeting Barry, who volunteers at the local Bishop's Football Museum, and listening to his passion as he shared how a gentleman with dementia came in and recognised himself in one of the old black and white photographs. And they developed a friendship as he used football memorabilia to help this gentleman reminisce and reconnect with his past. I'm similarly grateful to others in my constituency who give up their time running sports clubs, whether it's football, rugby, cricket, boxing, and providing opportunities for young people to exercise, connect and enjoy themselves. Secondly, I have to mention railways. It was in Shildon, in the southeast of my constituency, where Stephenson invented the rocket locomotive, making Stockton and Darlington the world's first commercial railway line 200 years ago next year. It's inspiring to see the commitment of local volunteers who work together to preserve this heritage, caring for parts of the line and organising bicentenary events. Likewise, those who work to save the Shildon Railway Institute that was set up by working people nearly 2 centuries ago with a library and schoolrooms to upskill the local workforce for the new industrial age. Thirdly, we're blessed in Bishop Auckland with fabulous arts and culture. It's the home of Stanley Jefferson, of Laurel and Hardy fame. It's also believed to be where Elgar first played the anthem Land of Hope and Glory. And how grateful I am to the volunteers who give their time to enable participation in the arts, Daisy Arts, Jack Drum, the Teesdale Operatic Society, the Weirdo Warblers, and Kinran, England's most spectacular outdoor theatre production. And the work they do is not only developing talent, but building the character and confidence of the rising generation. We also have magnificent countryside. And under the new boundaries, the constituency brings together 2 Durham Dales, Weardale and Teesdale, around the market town of Barnard Castle, which is not only a handy place to test your eyesight, it's also an idyllic place to stroll along the river with your family on a sunny Easter bank holiday. Surrounded as it is with hill sheep farms and moorland that are home to rare wildflowers and endangered ground nesting birds. So I'm full of admiration for those who work on the land and put in the graft to keep this place so lovely and to provide us with food. Yeah. And without wishing to disappoint the Honourable Member for North West Essex, when I met recently with local farmers, they were delighted to see that Labour was bringing in planning reforms and lifting the ban on onshore wind. Yeah. Finally, Bishop Auckland has a long connection to the church. Auckland Castle served for centuries as the home to the Prince Bishops, while the 7th century Escombe Saxon Church is one of the oldest in England and stands as a monument to the devotion of men and women who built it more than a millennium ago. But what I find equally inspiring is the work done by churches in our community today, like Woodhouse Close Church and Community Centre, and Children Alive, which recently received the King's Award for Voluntary Service. So what makes Bishop Auckland so special to me are the people I live amongst. People who have stood together in hard times. People who take pride in their neighbourhoods. People who serve without thought for themselves. And as I draw to a close, if I may make a slightly more political point, for too long, I think we've just accepted the decline of northern heartlands like Bishop Auckland. I live in the town centre, a place where 1 in 3 shops is boarded up. And our local businesses are excited to see the powers that this government will devolve to local authorities to compulsorily purchase some of those buildings. We'll hand them over to businesses and we will get our town centres booming again. And finally, I'm proud to be a member of the most representative Parliament in our history, with the highest percentage of women, minorities and state-educated members. There are also on both sets of benches some exceedingly talented people. It's already clear to me that while I will be bold speaking up for my constituents, there will always be someone more gifted in oratory or more learned. However, I hope if I can excel in anything, it will be in showing kindness and respect to my fellow members, to the incredible staff who've done so much to make me feel welcome in this rather strange place, and to my constituents, who I hope will always know that whatever our disagreements, that I love and care about them. Thank you.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the new member for Bishop Auckland on his speech, where we are all much more knowledgeable about his constituency now than we were a few minutes ago. So well done for that. Mr Deputy Speaker, I acknowledge that the planning system is in need of reform. We can't have a system that takes months and in many cases years for major projects that are crucial to economic growth and associated jobs to grind on through an endless system. In my constituency, most such projects are located in an area that is, and has been for many years, mainly industrial. And we should not, although we should not trample on local opinion, we have got to get those projects through the system much quicker than we do at the moment. The gracious speech included an extract which said, "My government believes that greater devolution of decision-making is at the heart of a modern dynamic economy and is a key driver of economic growth. And my ministers will introduce an English devolution bill. Legislation will be introduced to give new powers to metro mayors and combined authorities. This will support growth plans that bring economic benefit to communities. And our housing, of course, we need to increase the supply. But how do ministers square devolving decision-making with strengthening central direction of the planning process and tying the hands of planning authorities? The Labour manifesto said that the government would make full use of intervention powers. That doesn't sound good news for local democracy. Experience from my constituency is that local communities, in most cases, will accept more housing developments. But, as many recent developments in all parts of my constituency, from Humberston through New Waltham, Scarthoe, Laceby, Wootton and Barton, to name just a few, but they have the justified complaint that the highway infrastructure and the public services, such as school places, GPs and the like, who are already stretched, it's beyond what is acceptable. What assurances can ministers give that they will ensure new build and infrastructure and provision of public services will run in parallel? Another aspect of the planning process that angers people is that many appeals are determined by planning inspectors who frequently overrule council decisions that have been made after careful consideration of local circumstances, in some cases even overturning the local plan. That is not acceptable. Turning to local plans themselves, yes, they have gone through various stages of consultation, public hearings and so on, all of which passes the overwhelming majority of the public by, until an application is lodged that could change the whole character of their neighbourhood. Clearly the process is in need of review, something that I have previously argued, including some years ago introducing a 10-minute rule bill. If devolution and local decision-making is to mean anything, it is the planning issues that should indeed be determined wherever possible at a local level. Much has been made of ministers, and the Shadow Secretary of State made this point very well, who have lodged objections to planning applications in their own area. That's gone under the radar to some extent while they were on the opposition benches, but there's now no hiding place. Every Labour member who votes for the proposed changes to the planning will have to justify not supporting their constituents when there is a major planning application where some village or part of the town is up in arms about it. As someone who spent my childhood and early adulthood in a council house on the Grimsby estate, I have always supported the ability of local authorities to build council houses where that is appropriate. Certainly the ones that I lived in Grimsby were built in the early 1950s by a Conservative, whilst the Conservative government was in power, of course. They have stood the test of time. They are of higher quality, something that sadly is not the case with much of the social housing that is imposed on new developments. So I certainly would support the government if indeed they do have a programme to encourage and support councils in house building. But I'd be interested to know also how they would finance it. One proposal that is causing considerable concern, not just in my Brigg and Immingham constituency, but many others across the east coast of Lincolnshire, but through into East Anglia, is the National Grid upgrade proposals for the Grimsby to Walpole route. Proposals that could result in a network of 50-metre-high pylons running through some of the country's most beautiful countryside, including impacting on the Lincolnshire Wells area of outstanding natural beauty. I secured the final adjournment debate before the election, and the then Minister said that he was minded to order a review of this scheme. I would urge the Government to honour that commitment and follow through with that review. Returning finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, to devolution and the policy to create combined authorities. The proposals for the Greater Lincolnshire Authority have already passed through all stages of consultation, and a statutory instrument was prepared, but unfortunately the election intervened. Could I urge the Deputy Prime Minister, here's an opportunity for an early win in a wish to create combined authorities. Put forward that statutory instrument, and most of the Lincolnshire MPs, I'm sure, will give you some support. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Maiden speech, Dr Scott Arthur.
I'm obliged to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to make my maiden speech. I'd like to start by thanking the member opposite for a fantastic speech, but I fear he's only made my job a little bit more difficult. And I have to say it's a delight to give my speech as part of a debate led by our fantastic Deputy Prime Minister. It's an honour and privilege to stand before this House as a representative of Edinburgh South West. I'm deeply grateful for my constituents for placing their trust in me, and also my church for praying for me, although I do note that they prayed more after I won the election rather than before it. I'm committed to serving them with dedication and integrity. Before I address the subject matter of the King's Speech, I wish to pay tribute to my immediate predecessor, Joanna Cherry KC, who represented the constituency for 9 years. I had many dealings with her office in my role as a councillor, and I always found her team to be utterly professional. I wish them all well. Joanna Cherry herself was a formidable parliamentarian. Members will recall that during the Brexit crisis, she worked hard to ensure government decision-making remained transparent and subject to parliamentary scrutiny. We all owe her a huge debt for that. I must also say that whilst I disagree with her on many issues, I am happy to stand in complete solidarity with her in the face of the threats she has faced. It pains me that since coming here, so many others have spoken about threats and intimidation as well, and I think this is an issue we must take seriously. I must, however, tell the House that the campaign for Edinburgh South West between Johnny Cherry and myself was conducted entirely on issues that matter to local people there, which is perhaps why I'm so proud to be here to address the House today. I must also, Mr Deputy Speaker, pay tribute to my predecessor's predecessor, Alistair Darling. He was one of the greatest public servants of my lifetime. He sat here from 1987 to 2015. Like me, he was a councillor in Edinburgh and convener of the city's Transport Committee, before he went on to serve as MP for Edinburgh South West. The similarities may end there. Indeed, we all must hope that I'm never called to save the Bank of England, as he did. I know Alistair is still much missed, and I'm proud to follow in his footsteps. Indeed, without his help, I doubt I would have been elected as a councillor in 2017. Before I address myself to debate, I want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to my constituency, its institutions and its people. At this point, you may need a map. Edinburgh South West is the best part of the greatest city in the world. It stretches from the west end of Princes Street to the East Cairn Hill, which is some 18 kilometres to the south-west. Along that length of the constituency, it moves from dense urban communities, places like Gorgie, the home of Hearts Football Club, Dalry, Parkhead, Westerhill, Sighthill and Oxgangs, to suburban settlements like Collington, Craiglockhart, Swanston, Baberton Mains, and to the semi-rural Waterfleet villages of Curry, Juniper Green and Balerno. And of all those, Oxgangs is perhaps the place I know and I love most. And I know there that many people struggle with living in temporary accommodation and overcrowded accommodation. And I think that's why it's so important today to hear the ambition from the Deputy Prime Minister about building affordable homes. I know that in Edinburgh, we've worked with the whole city and we've set aside land for 37,000 new homes in Edinburgh. So the land is there, the planning is there, but the barrier to building those new homes is a lack of funding from the Scottish Government. And I hope they can now follow what we're doing here and show more ambition around affordable housing in Scotland. In terms of natural beauty, the Pentland Hills and the Waterfleet dominate my constituency, and the habitats along the Union Canal shouldn't be forgotten. But of course, it's the people in my constituency that make it so special, like those that volunteer at the Waterfleet Conservation Trust, or those that converted a disused railway tunnel into Scotland's largest historical mural, the Collington Tunnel. Please Google it later. I also must mention Tipperith, a unique charity which delivers residential and day services for people with learning difficulties, and it really is unique. I will also talk about Harriet Watt University. Its Edinburgh campus is perhaps the biggest employer in my constituency. It supported and developed me there every day since I started work there in 1996 until I was elected to this place. I shall miss my civil engineering colleagues and the many students it welcomes to Scotland from around the world. I hope to use some of my time here to support higher education, particularly the well-being of students. Mental health support in Scotland is failing its young people and is acting a barrier to many of them reaching their full potential. I will work with anyone and everyone to address this and the many other challenges facing students across the UK. Other large employers in my constituency include Lothian Buses, a bus company which is owned by the people of Edinburgh and which defines the city just as much as the castle. The castle isn't in my constituency, I have to stress. And which, if some members question municipal ownership of public transport or the importance of collaborative working between trade unions and management, they should speak to some of the 2 million passengers that Lothian Buses carries every week without any subsidy. Big businesses are important too in my constituency, but it's the small ones that define it, and they are at the heart of many of the neighbourhoods. I know that many have high hopes that the UK and Scottish Government will now work together to support them more. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am also proud to say that I have 2 infantry barracks in my constituency, Dreghorn and Redford, both of which are valued by local residents as real assets, and they never cause me a problem as a councillor. I know the proposals for an Armed Forces Commissioner in the King's Speech will be supported by many in my constituency, particularly if it helps improve the living quarters for our service personnel and also supports spouses at the point of relationship breakdown, particularly where domestic abuse has been an issue. Elections are a reminder that we're all equal in this country, but it pained me that during the election campaign many constituents felt they were less equal than others. That is why local groups in my constituency like Soul Food Oxgangs, Best Bib and Tucker and Whale Arts must be mentioned in my speech, as they all work hard to ensure people feel included and valued. And that's our job too, of course. Indeed, I think all of us here have a duty to keep on listening to voters after this election, now that the election is over. The first-past-the-post system means that I was elected on just 40.9% of the vote. Still can't believe it, to be honest. And I know some of those people still want to be reassured that they did the right thing. I'm only here because I promised to work with other parties where possible and to listen to everybody in my constituency, no matter their sex, gender, background, faith, age or birthplace. I'll keep listening to people, even if they voted for my opponents or did not vote at all. And we know, of course, that the people who need our help most didn't vote for us. There, amongst them, is the 3,000 children in my constituency who are living in poverty. And that number has grown across the whole of the UK since Labour last sat on these benches. And that should shame us all. I know that costed measures in the King's Speech are our best chance of changing those lives. Measures like GB Energy, building more homes, New Deal for working people, and our plans for sustainable economic growth won't just get our country back on track and help us meet our climate targets, they'll also give parents again of a hope of a better future for their children. The Child Poverty Task Force is an opportunity to maximise the benefits of these policies by integrating their delivery. This is the change our country needs and voted for. We must now work together across this chamber to deliver it. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And may I congratulate the new member for Edinburgh South West on his maiden speech. And it was wonderful to hear him champion so many local charities and causes, particularly for young people. It's great to hear that he cares about mental health and also the well-being of young people moving forward. And also may I congratulate the new member for Bishop Auckland for his speech and his sort of drive-by of the entire constituency of the wonderful things that you can see and experience in your patch. And what I love about both of these speeches is that you both put your constituents first, and we're just there talking about being a local champion. And whatever party you're from or part of the House you're from, I will support anyone who wants to put their constituents first and be an advocate for them in this House. And on that subject, I am here because the people of Beaconsfield, Marlow, and the South Bucks villages sent a clear message to me during the general election that they want me to stand up and defend the Greenbelt. And I made that promise to them back in 2019. I made that promise to them again in 2024, that I would stand up and I would defend the Greenbelt. And I will continue to do so. It's not just special for my constituents, it's vital. It's vital because the Greenbelt provides the lungs of London. It is vital because it is the buffer for my constituents between the sprawl of London and Slough. It is vital because green space provides much-needed mental health and well-being space for my constituents. And it is vital because it provides that biodiversity and nature conservation areas that we need between London and the home counties. It is so vital that we protect nature moving forward, and I want to be a champion for that as well. And once our green belt is lost, it is lost forever, and we can't get it back. And I want to be clear. I believe in the right housing, in the right place, with the right infrastructure. And it is entirely a false prospectus to think that you can defend the green belt and then somehow you're anti-growth and anti-housing. That's not true. Here is the truth. The government seems determined to deny the green belt is green space. Any attempt by the government to use some Orwellian twisting of the words into making it grey belt will fail in the sunlight of simple truth. In Marlow, in my constituency, we fought together working with local community groups to stop the Marlow Film Studio from being built on green belt space. We worked tirelessly to protect the green belt to make sure that future generations could enjoy that beautiful green area. We fought as a community, and it was rightly rejected. If the government tried to bring it back, I and the residents will fight it every inch of the way. And the government has established its intent in the first 3 days of its existence. That intent is that the government knows best and communities will be ignored. The Chancellor, and funnily enough it was the Chancellor, not the Deputy Prime Minister, announced that they were calling in an application rejected by planners and the Planning Inspectorate to build a data centre in the Ivas, which is right up against London. It was a blatant attack on local opinion and professional planning officers. And do ministers really believe that there are no better sites for a data centre than directly in Greenbelt, the only Greenbelt that separates us from London? I say to the government, you will soon discover that you are on the wrong side of this debate. Our green belt in the South Bucks is not a political, ideological prize to be won. Residents will make their voices known, and I will be right there by their side. It matters to my constituents and the generations to follow, who will grow up and live in the beautiful area of Beaconsfield, Marlow, and the South Bucks villages. So I urge the government to think again. Leave our green belt alone. Thank you.
I call Emma Foody to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for Beaconsfield, who spoke very passionately about her communities. And it's been wonderful to hear so many maiden speeches today and over preceding days as members speak with great pride about their constituencies. And I stand here today representing my home constituency of Cramlington and Killingworth, and I speak with similar pride. The place from which generations of my family have hailed, have worked and have loved, and it's a great honour to be here representing the area today. My home and where I grew up is a little place called Wide Open, which in the past was represented by the giant of our labour movement, Margaret Bondfield, a shop worker and a trade unionist who was the first ever woman in the cabinet. Now, as a former shop worker, as a trade unionist and as a cooperative member, it is a pleasure to see the provisions in this most gracious speech to provide shop workers with the protections that they deserve and to make our high streets stronger. Cramlington and Killingworth constituency was newly formed at this election. Dominated by our two new towns, the seat is made up of a further 25 villages and settlements, every single one of them a community in its own right. And whilst I don't propose to list every single one of them now, I will fight for the support and success of each and every one of them. Because our area and our communities are places of industry, of innovation and creativity. Whether through coal mines, factories, through the arts, my community has contributed a lot, and there is a lot that has put it on the map. Now, it's a second mention today for George Stephenson as the father of the British Railways, and whilst the rocket might be in Shildon, he learned his trade and started his inventions in my constituency, where my ancestors worked alongside him to build our railroads. And I'm sure a favourite of yours, Mr Deputy Speaker, whatever happened to the Lightly lads? Colleagues may recall Bob and Thelma's new starter home on a nice new estate. Well, that estate was in Killingworth. We also have notable public art in the shape of a giant spoon. We have a herd of concrete hippos and a lady of the north in Northumberlandia. And grown-up members my age may recall the absolutely iconic BBC children's TV programme, Geordie Racer. Well, Spuggy and Wordy got up to hijinks in Seaton Delaval Hall, our stunning National Trust property. And for those familiar, I'm sorry that you'll have the theme tune in your head all day now. And more recently, for those who've watched popular detective show Vera, you may have noticed the stunning cliffs and coastline, where all too often a body may be found at the bottom of them. Well, those cliffs and those beaches, the coastline of southeast Northumberland, including Seaton Sluice and Old Hartley, it's second to none, and they are ours. And the crime rate is much lower than ITV might be having you believe. Now, as is tradition, I will pay tribute to the previous MPs, but with a newly created constituency, I don't pay tribute to one but four, and four current and previous members of this House. But I will start with a predecessor but one, Ronnie Campbell, MP for Blythe Valley for over 30 years, and a great friend to many in this place and whose loss we still feel locally. And then Ian Levy, who was elected as the first ever Conservative for Blythe Valley in 2019. I know he cares very deeply for our area, and I know he will want to see it prosper and to see our communities thrive. My right honourable friend, the member for Tynemouth, who of course is also our Chief Whip. And it says here, has shown me great kindness and generosity, which I can only assume was a late Whip's office edit. But in all seriousness, he has been a great support to me. And finally, to pay tribute to the honourable members for Newcastle North and Newcastle East and Wallsend, who are both phenomenal advocates for the North East, from whose constituencies we took a variety of towns and settlements and villages. Now, when I first got involved in politics, I was warned that it could be a boys' club. Well, those people underestimate the girls of Sacred Heart High School, where the three of us all attended. And we were told there, in no uncertain terms, that places like this are meant for people like us, and to serve alongside them is a tremendous privilege. Yeah. But in all seriousness now, I'm proud to be here today and able to speak on behalf of my communities on this most gracious speech. A wide-ranging set of commitments and actions that I know will deliver not only for my community, but across the country. And not just in housing and crucially in leasehold reform, but for our economy, for our energy security and for policing. And I'm particularly proud of the measures to support our National Health Service. As a former 999 call taker at the North East Ambulance Service, I know how my former colleagues work tirelessly to serve people, often in the most challenging and most desperate of circumstances. It is an honour to be here and to have their back in this place. I believe passionately in the measures in this most gracious address, which we fought so hard to earn the country's support for, and I cannot wait to get to work. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I call Harriet Cross to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak, and it's an honour to follow the member for Cramlington and Killingworth. You are clearly very proud of your roots and what you have achieved in the area, and it's lovely to also follow another girl from the North East, although this time it's the North East of Scotland. It's an incredible honour to be elected to this place to serve the great people of Gordon and Buchan. And having moved home many times in my lifetime, more than I can remember, from Yorkshire to Ireland to Scotland and many times in between, I have seen my fair share of houses, but I can definitely say that this one will take the most getting used to. As you're all aware, you're not a true Scottish MP if you don't proclaim that your constituency is the most beautiful. So, from the beaches of Balmeedy and Newborough, through the fertile farmland of Formartin, Geary, Huntly and Turriff, and to the heights of the Corran Hills and the Benihee Range, Gordon and Buchan has it all. So I can tell you now, in all seriousness, that Gordon and Buchan really is the most beautiful constituency, not just in Scotland, but the whole of the UK. And those of us who are blessed of living north of the Watford Gap know that there's a direct correlation between how far north you get and how approachable, determined, you have a dry sense of humour and great company. So I'm also delighted to say that I'm the Conservative member with our most northerly constituency. But first, I must reflect on my predecessors, beginning with the most recent Conservative members, both Colin Clark in Gordon and David Duckett in Banff and Buchan, the two former constituencies that now combine to make Gordon and Buchan. Both Colin and David were embedded in our rural communities. They are unwavering champions for our region, in particular being loud, constructive and prominent voices for our farmers, fishermen, distilleries and the energy sector. And I also want to take the opportunity to wish David Duckett and his family all the very best in his ongoing recovery. It'd be wrong of me also not to mention Malcolm Bruce, Baron Bruce of Benihee, who served Gordon for 22 years up until 2015. And it was a show of the mark that he left on the area, but his name was mentioned to me, always very fondly, on the doors many times during this election campaign. And finally, to the former SNP member for Gordon, my immediate predecessor, Richard Thompson, who has long served the people of Gordon and Buchan and Aberdeenshire, both here but also in Aberdeenshire as part of the Aberdeenshire Council, both as leader and opposition leader. While he and I won't pretend to see eye to eye on the means, I know that we both agree that we want the very best now and in the future for our special corner of Aberdeenshire. Much was achieved for Gordon and Buchan and North East of Scotland in the last Parliament, and I do wish to draw attention to the North East Investment Zone, an £80 million investment in our region as part of the last Conservative government's levelling up agenda. A real investment in our area's growth, development and potential, an investment in our future. The North East shines in every way with energy. Indeed, the energy sector is what first brought my family to Inverurie, the largest town in Gordon and Buchan, 50 years ago this year. My grandfather, having been medically discharged from the Navy, never lost his love of service or the sea, and so channelled this into creating in Aberdeen the International Association for Safety and Survival Training, whose courses are still today used by each and every offshore worker in our oil and gas sector. And I am sure if he was still here today, he could give me some sound advice for surviving in this place. The energy sector powers Aberdeenshire, whether through direct jobs and high-skilled employment to the associated services and hospitality sectors that rely on it. But to the people of Gordon and Buchan and the North East of Scotland, the debate on the future of the oil and gas sector isn't really about energy security, markets or net zero. It's about our jobs and our livelihoods. It's about knowing that we have secure employment for the years to come and that our children will not have to move away in order to start their careers, or that the bottom is not going to fall out of our local economy. I cannot imagine any member of this House sitting here and allowing their constituency's key employment sector to be run down or conceded, and I will not do that either. Our rural communities are the beating heart of Gordon and Buchan. Indeed, 3/4 of the land in Gordon and Buchan is classed as agricultural, a fifth is forestry, and only 2% is thought as built up. So if you drop a pin in a map, you're more likely to land in a field or a forest than you are on a house. Before being elected, I worked as a rural surveyor, meeting farmers from across Aberdeenshire, many of whom I'm now proud to call my constituents. And I can tell you, as intimidating as it might be being on this side of the House looking across at the government benches, it is nothing compared to sitting at a farmhouse table trying to tell your farming clients that no, their farm isn't worth 3 times what they think it's worth, or that their worst where heifer isn't going to get top figures at next week's sale. I am delighted that my first contribution to this House is today's rural affairs debate. I know, and my constituents know, that rural living is unique, rewarding, and in my opinion, far superior to urban life. But we also know that it's not all about green fields, welly boots, or Labradors, as idyllic as that might sound. The reality is that it's locals waiting in villages like Fyvie, Auckland, and Newdeer for the only bus of the day that never arrives. It's the only healthcare facilities for many miles closing down. It's children having to move away to build their careers. It's poor quality, unsuitable roads, or it's a lack of housing or houses without gas, poor broadband and no phone coverage. We in the UK quite rightly hold our rural landscapes up in lights, our green and pleasant lands which bring ecological benefits but also much needed tourism to our remote areas. But rural communities are not just there solely to be the escapes or playthings of others. They are where my constituents make their homes, their livelihoods, grow up and grow old. We need to and must have tailored policies for our rural communities that help industries such as farming, food and drink producers and the numerous SMEs across Gordon and Buchan that bring so much, not just to the immediate area, but the region and the UK as a whole. Yes, we are less densely populated, and yes, understandably, we have less choice for services or where to find work, but we have no less aspiration. I am proud to be sent here by the people of Gordon and Buchan to represent them, to fight for them and always keep their interests at the top of the agenda. Thank you.
Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for Gordon and Buchan for her excellent maiden speech as well, which I enjoyed. And I also have to mention the excellent maiden speeches for my other North East colleagues, Honourable Lady for Cramlington and Killingworth, new constituency, and my honourable friend for, I want to say, Bishop Auckland, thank you, who gave both excellent speeches. Looking forward to hearing more from them in the weeks and months and years to come. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, having first entered this House 19 years ago, I'm honoured to once again have been elected to serve my constituents in Washington and Gateshead South, also a new constituency name. It's fantastic to see so many new faces around the estate, and my door is always open if any new members, or indeed old ones, want to pop in for a bit of advice or a cup of tea or just a friendly face. This King's speech ushers in a new era of government, one based on service of the people, focused on building back trust in politics, which is greatly needed, by, as said in the King's speech, adhering to the principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all. And we will start this by bringing in legislation that will transform the rights of every worker in this country. As a trade unionist myself, I believe workers must have the right to access trade union representation and the repeal of the disastrous minimum service levels legislation that failed to protect public service users and workers alike.
Absolutely.
We will ban all exploitative zero-hour contracts that leave people in uncertain and unstable employment. We will definitively ban fire and rehire practices that I know my honourable friend led the way on with his excellent private members bill that sadly did not make it. And we will protect workers' well-being by ending short-notice shift cancellations. And we will introduce the right to switch off so workers can enjoy a healthier, structured work-life balance. I think we could do with a bit of that sometimes as well. And we will establish rights such as paternity pay and the right to challenge unfair dismissal as rights from day one. The basic rights of a worker are not a reward earned after years of service. They are rights from day one. This government has already got the ball rolling, building on the excellent work of the former Labour governments to truly deliver devolved power. It was excellent to see that just days after moving into Downing Street, the Prime Minister welcomed all Labour and Conservative, though, yes, thankfully mostly Labour, Metro mayors to Downing Street to discuss how to kickstart growth in all parts of the country. Local knowledge is superior to departmental control 9 times out of 10, so it is only right that we bring power back to communities. Among the mayors invited to meet with the Prime Minister was our excellent new mayor for the North East, Kim McGuinness, who I've worked with in my long-running campaign to reopen the Leigh line and extend the metro to Washington. I'm sure you've all heard me say this, but Washington is one of the largest towns in the UK without a direct rail link.
Disgrace.
It is. We see wasted opportunities, people unable to travel easily for work, school, university, or even to see loved ones. To quote the former Conservative member for Sedgefield, with whom I co-chaired the Leigh Line all-party group, and I quote, "Without physical mobility, there can be no social mobility." Now he's not here, I'm going to nick that line. I am pleased to see that with a Labour government and a Labour mayor, the project will at long last become a reality. As someone who grew up in a council house, my family was totally reliant also on social security. Free school meals were a lifeline for us, but I know more importantly in many ways how vital it is to have a warm, safe, secure house. First and foremost, that is what saved my family more than anything else. That is why throughout this general election campaign and when listening to the King's speech, I've been so pleased to see Labour's commitment to building 1.5 million new homes. Not just houses, but social housing and affordable housing based on 5 key principles that will enable these houses to turn into secure homes and these homes to turn into stable and thriving communities. We will also deliver for our children with policies that intend to tackle childhood health and obesity head-on. Our plans to deliver free breakfast clubs in every primary school in England will ensure kids can start school with a meal in their bellies ready to learn. But we know that child feeding doesn't start and end with the school day. We will also tackle the crisis of youth nutrition outside of school by restricting the advertisement of junk food and the sale of high caffeine energy drinks to children. Both things I longed called for when I was Shadow Public Health Minister for 4 years and Shadow Minister for Children and Families for 4 years, as well as while I was Chair of the School Food All-Party Group since 2010. So I could not welcome these developments more fervently. We cannot shy away from protecting our children's health, and that is why I also welcome our tobacco and vapes bill, carrying on from the work of the former government, I have to say, to phase out smoking that will ensure our children will live a healthier future. As we look to the coming years, Mr Deputy Speaker, of our government, I am so excited not only to see these policies and more come to fruition and deliver the change that this government was elected to bring, but to work with members across the House to deliver this together, because we need it for the benefit of all our constituents. Thank you.
Before Before calling the next speaker, can I say that unfortunately, because of the pressure on time, we have to reduce the time for the maximum length of speeches to 5 minutes, but that does not apply to those who are making their maiden speeches. Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be in the chamber today, and I congratulate all new and returning members on their election successes. It's an honour to be back in this place and to be called to speak in this debate on the King's Speech. And I would like to start by thanking my constituents in Aldridge-Brownhills for returning me to this place for a 4th time, and to the residents of Feasy Park Farm, Park Hall, Netherhall and Orchard Hills for returning me for the 1st time following the boundary changes. Now, there is much to consider in this King's Speech, and rest assured I will welcome those elements that benefit my constituents. However, my job on the opposition bench remains to get the best for my Aldridge-Brownhills constituency and my constituents. And where the government's legislation and plans harm my constituency, I will stand up and be their voice and fight for their interests. Which brings me nicely onto the areas that I wish to raise today, starting with housing. We need homes, but we need the right homes built in the right place with the right infrastructure to support them and the communities, and we need local decision making. What we don't need to see is swathes of houses, the wrong homes, the wrong mix, in the wrong place, driven by top-down mandatory targets. This is not NIMBYism, this is common sense. And it's why I've always advocated for a brownfield-first approach, because the minute you release the green belt, that's it. When it's gone forever. You take away the integrity of our communities, the sense of amenity and belonging, something that I feel we all believe is vital. So it concerns me that while the benches opposite say they will prioritise brownfield sites, and they have coined this phrase grey belt land to meet their target, they are also telling local authorities to identify areas with green belt collars to build on. This surely is wrong. It simply risks nibbling away at our green belt until it is gone. The definition of greenbelt, of course, in case we need a reminder, is it's a buffer zone between towns and countryside. It's a planning tool to prevent urban sprawl. In the case of my constituency, it prevents us being subsumed into the suburbs of a greater Birmingham. This is not a nostalgic vision, it's a future vision for future generations. And it's something that the former Mayor Andy Street had a vision for. And it was thanks to him, his leadership and his brownfield first approach, we have seen 16,000 new homes built and thousands of jobs created on brownfield land, which has benefited many, including in the Walsall Borough. We need to see more of this approach. Surely build out the brownfield sites first before we release any green belt, with more financial incentives for land remediation funds. And we also need to understand what the new government means by grey belt. Is it simply another grey area? I, for one, sincerely hope not. One specific area I would also like to seek clarity on is the new powers for compulsory purchase. And I'm hoping this really could unlock some of the brownfield sites. I know in my constituency there are some small derelict sites, often pubs in town centres. Let's look at working with local communities and unlock some of these sites. But communities, Mr Deputy Speaker, also need transport. It's inherently linked to communities. It's key to jobs and opportunities. The benches opposite have set out they will get Britain moving. But I am deeply concerned, to put it mildly, that the new Labour Mayor for the West Midlands has said he will review the decision for a train station in Aldridge. What has happened to the money the former Mayor Andy Street and I secured for this project? In the absence of any confirmation that it will be completed on time by 2027 within the budget allocated, I can only assume that he has no intention of delivering this project. It's 65 years since Aldridge had passenger trains. Today we have the track, we have freight trains, we have the land for a car park, and various partners are already working on this. It might not be a big deal, Mr Deputy Speaker, to Mayor Parker, but it certainly is to the residents of Aldridge and to me. And briefly, I'm conscious of the time, I want to touch on crime and justice, as this also matters to my constituents. Communities need police officers and they need police stations. And I will continue my campaign to keep Aldridge Police Station. With a for sale board appearing recently at Sutton Coldfield, it's time for the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner to come clean on his intentions for Aldridge Police Station. We need our police station as a base for our local bobbies, to increase the safety of our residents and to support our communities. And if
make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And having listened carefully to the debate around His Majesty's gracious speech, I'm grateful for this opportunity to make my first speech in this chamber. It's a privilege and an honour to represent the communities of Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, where I was born and raised. Much of this debate has sought to pit rural and suburban against each other, but I say to the House as a representative of both that we can deliver for both, and that's precisely what I expect this government will do. Mr Speaker, distinguished predecessors have represented my seat. And politicians in maiden speeches often say that they stand on the shoulders of giants. Well, rarely is it so true as in my case, as not only was my predecessor, Sir Simon Clarke, a giant in physical terms, but also within his own party, and particularly in his admirable zeal for planning reform, an issue upon which he campaigned and stood up to his own party, and it's fitting that this debate today places such emphasis on those reforms. This is a government committed to building the homes and the infrastructure that this country needs, and it's measures like the Planning and Infrastructure Bill which will start to create the jobs and the growth that we need, and I'll be pushing for Teesside to be at the heart of that work. If the House will permit me, I'd also like to pay tribute to two other predecessors from my party. Firstly, Tom Blenkinsop, who some in the House will remember, who served not only his party and constituency, but also his country in the Royal Military Police. And Dr Ashok Kumar, my MP growing up, who has already been referenced in this debate by my honourable friend, the member for Stockton North, a tenacious constituency MP whose model I hope to follow. Ashok once said that our constituency is a microcosm of British society. He was right. It's not particularly left-wing or particularly right-wing, but it's full of decent people who want the best for their families. Our identity is complex. We're officially in the North East, but we're also proudly in Yorkshire, part of the historic North Riding. We've been called Cleveland and Langbar, and today we're told we're in the Tees Valley. But whatever you may call it, our home is an incredible place. My constituency sits between wildly different landscapes at each point of the compass. To the north, you find the beach, where the North Sea frets, washes out over the seafront at places like Skinninggrove. To the south, you leave the beautiful market town of Gainsborough and meet the vast wild purple of the North York moors. To the east, the rolling fields of East Cleveland, rural North Yorkshire at its best. Proud villages and towns, from Loftus to Lingdale, Skelton to Stanghow, and Broughton, where I grew up. I'm proud to be our constituency's first MP from the villages, and I hope to serve them well. To the west, you'll find suburban South Middlesbrough, home to many working families, and home in Morton to the birthplace of one of this country's greatest explorers in Captain James Cook. When you venture further, those communities give way to the towering chimneys and snaking pipes of industrial Teesside, once the beating heart of Britain's economy, the infant Hercules, as Gladstone called it, home to a 300-year economic relay race from one major industry to another. First fishing and agriculture, then coal, then iron and steel, then chemicals. We built the world, the saying on Teesside goes, as steel forged in Teesside furnaces found its way into the Sydney Harbour Bridge and spanned over the Victoria Falls. When Churchill's War Cabinet met in their underground bunker not far from here, or when the ball hit the net at Wembley, it all happened under structures of Teesside steel. Today, we're perfectly positioned for the green jobs of the future. We already produce around half the country's hydrogen, and with the right industrial strategy, we can create jobs in hydrogen, in carbon capture and storage, in clean power, wind, nuclear, solar, and our port. If our engineering capabilities are harnessed, we can lead the world again, which legislation like the Great British Energy Bill, the Crown Estate Bill, and the Planning and Infrastructure Bill can deliver. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, Teesside is more than just the place, it is also the people. Like steel, Teesside is an alloy, a meld of different communities that shaped us. From the miners and the Methodists, the labourers who came from Ireland, the ironworkers from Wales, sailors from Japan, Jewish refugees from the pogroms of Europe, trade unionists, chemical workers, and on and on. These are the small and disparate atoms which Teesside took on and blended into our culture, strengthening it into something solid and secure, bonded together with values, fairness and respect and collective responsibility to look out for the community. We see this today in so many local community organisations, from the Gisborough Bridge Association to East Cleveland Good Neighbours to the eco-shops we see in Martin and Colby Newham and others, because we know what it is like to experience economic hardship, with levels of poverty and destitution which have not been seen in decades. And when times get tough, it is easy to fall into habits of division and blame. It's much harder to take that common pain and channel it into a common purpose, but that is what Teessiders do best. It was there in times of economic shock, whether from globalisation or global pandemic. It was there in the floods and the food banks, that instinct, that base code of the people of Teesside to come together and look out for those in need. Community in the face of adversity. That's our spirit, embedded like ironstone deep in our culture. The unbowed and unbroken spirit of the infant Hercules, that's what we're about. And with the powers set out in these bills, the devolution to take back control of services, the investment in the jobs of tomorrow, we can once again drive prosperity on Teesside and prosperity across Britain, rebuilding our communities and rebuilding our country. Thank you.
Alicia Cams.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I join the House in thanking His Majesty the King and Her Majesty for their dedicated service and continued example to us all. I also welcome to this new place all their new members, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his maiden speech. It is a privilege to be returned to this House, having served the people of Rutland and Melton for 4 years. However, I'm returned to represent the wonderful people of Rutland, Stamford and the Harbour and South Kesteven villages. So I'd like to briefly reflect on the new communities I serve, because it may not be known that service runs deep within South Lincolnshire. In World War II, our communities on their own raised enough money for a Spitfire to fight for our country. It is also in our communities where the apple dropped for Sir Isaac Newton in 1687. And even a long, long time ago, Bytham Castle was known to have a Lady Alicia, the Lady of Bytham. I suspect I shall not be getting this title. It is also home to Eastern Ward Gardens, a place that President Franklin D. Roosevelt described, I bless you all, President Franklin D. Roosevelt described as a dream of nirvana, almost too good to be true. So it's no surprise that Stamford's Honeystone streets, whose patterns have essentially remained the same since Saxon times, often grace the pages of the best places to live in this country. It was also the filming site for Pride and Prejudice, the Da Vinci Code, Middlemarch, and most recently, Grimsthorpe Castle's home to Bridgerton. Somewhat uniquely for a parliamentary seat, Rutland and Stamford sits across 3 counties, Leicestershire, Rutland and Lincolnshire, so I have my work cut out for me. But what unites us is the rural landscape and traditions we share, our rural way of life embodied in the fields, farms and natural environment we are blessed to inhabit, and we hope to bequeath to the next generation. But protecting our green and pleasant lands is not about sentimentality. Our rural environment is the true workhorse of our country even. Lincolnshire and Rutland alone produce 30% of the UK's vegetables, 18% of our poultry, 30% of turkeys and 20% of all English wheat. We are the agricultural super producer of our country. And yet the King's speech offered very little for us. In the same vein as the Labour Party's manifesto, which did not mention the word rural even once, it continued by ignoring rural concerns and rural communities, ignoring farmers, and it has put forward a different approach for development, setting out a centralised powers for Westminster to impose projects onto the countryside, stripping away the voice of local people. The consequences of this approach were apparent last week when the Secretary of State for Energy imposed 3 mega solar plants on communities, 2 of which sit within Lincolnshire and Rutland. Now, during the last Parliament, I consistently opposed the Malapar solar plant and was dismayed to see the Secretary of State wave it through after only 3 days on the job. Yesterday, he referred to himself as a super nerd. Now, whilst I would never question his self-classification, I do question how somebody can read over 3,000 pages of quasi-judicial documentation in just that time, whilst also getting the grips of a new department. Explains perhaps why he missed or ignored the fact that even the planning inspectorate told him to turn down one of these applications. Now, there are well-documented links between Uyghur forced labour and the primary developer behind Mallar Pass. Labour has said they want a renewal in public life and a focus on public service. But I ask where the sense of duty is to responsible and considered governance when we see decisions made through that are frankly being made for a propaganda announcement to Labour to make with what they've done their first 7 days. decisions that solely affected Conservative voting communities. Together, these 3 solar plants will remove 6,000 acres of good quality agricultural land, the land which feeds our country and powers our nation. But I wish to delve more into the issues of slave labour. For years, I have spoken out against what is taking place in Xinjiang. This House, including the new Secretary of State for Energy, voted to declare what's taking place as a genocide. In opposition, Labour promised not only if they became the party government would they declare it formally a genocide as a government, but they would take the Chinese government to court. I look forward for updates on this activity. Yet in government they have decided to carpet our countryside with solar panels produced by the blood of Uyghur slave labourers. The company behind Malar Pass, Canadian Solar, was found by our Foreign Office to have the highest complicity in Uyghur forced labour. It is sanctioned by the US government for its ongoing campaign of repression against Muslim minority groups. A company who rang my office and asked what I wanted for me to drop my opposition. Is that a company we want operating on our land? So I ask, on behalf of his colleague, the Secretary of State, I will happily give way.
I thank my little friend for giving way, and can I congratulate her on her speech, but also say that I think on these benches there would be fulsome support for measures that looked at the supply chain for solar panels and made sure there was not slave labour in them. Would she agree with me?
I agree entirely. I thank my right honourable friend, who has always been one of the greatest advocates for tackling slave labour within this Parliament. She has an incredible history behind her. So I ask on behalf of his colleague, the Secretary of State for Energy, will the front bench now apologise to 32 slave labour NGOs who oppose the Malar Pass? Will he apologise to the British people for signing over thousands of acres to prime agricultural land to such a company? And will he apologise to 3,400 people whose petition I presented in this place, the highest number of wet signatures ever presented in this Parliament? And does he accept that the loudest statement made last week was not that we stand full square behind renewables in this place? It was to give a green light to all companies complicit in slave labour and Uyghur slave labour that they can flood our country with bloody solar panels. This government is happy to go green on blood labour, and I will not stand for it. Very briefly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would just make on the point of rural economies my absolute opposition to the government's intention to charge VAT on independent schools. There are 10 in my communities. They employ over 2,000 people. Well over 1,000 children with special education needs go to those schools, let alone the 1 in 5 of my constituents who are military or veterans who send their children to these schools. This is ideology and dogma. There is no plan to support our comprehensive schools. Who will have to support? I would very happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
The Honourable Lady is making a very fine speech again and highlighting an area where not only is she talking about pressure on those families, but also any other family who will then see those children going to the state schools in the area. Would you like to comment on that?
My right honourable friend is, as usual, absolutely on point. In Rutland alone, there are only 3 places in Year 9 for new children. So where are these children going to go? And why are you punishing parents who want the best for their children? Before you try to suggest to me as an out-of-touch story, my children go to my local comprehensive just as I did. But I recognise that this is wrong for our country, wrong for our local education system, wrong for our military families, and wrong for those who rely on employment by our local schools. This is dogma once again. I expected better. I wrap up by saying that the government has shown some good grace and maturity in adopting some of the previous government's bills into their agenda. It is a sign of political strength to acknowledge when other parties have good ideas and adopt them in your time in power. So I can suggest to fill the blanks in their rural policy, they look at ours. £1 billion increase in farming budget should be announced over the course of this Parliament. There should be reformed planning rules to support farming infrastructure. The introduction of legally binding food security targets should be absolutely the heart of what they do, and they should recognise that rural communities contribute so much to our communities. We provide the food we eat, we offer an escape and access to nature, and we act as custodians for traditions stepping back deep into our history. I will work every single day for my communities, and I hope the government will see sense to do the same.
Rodder. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today. May I first also thank my constituents for returning me to this place. Indeed, many of them I'm representing for the first time. I'd like to speak in support of the King's speech and to raise a number of points on issues which are important to my constituents and to many across the country. Mr Deputy Speaker, the King's speech set out nothing less than a programme for national renewal. And this is an opportunity to change our country for the better for people across this country and indeed for my residents in Reading. And I want to draw on a series of examples to show just how important the measures announced earlier actually are. I would like to start with the important area of infrastructure, in particular the need for data centres, for onshore wind, and for new electricity connectivity, all absolutely essential if we are to get our economy growing again after 14 years of very low growth and indeed of austerity. New homes, Mr Deputy Speaker, are vital to tackle the housing crisis, and I speak from great experience of residents in Reading who are under severe pressure with the high cost of purchasing a house in their home counties and also the very high cost of renting, and indeed a growing population. Thousands of local families are struggling to get on the housing ladder, and they're struggling both to buy, but they're also struggling to find good quality rental properties. Action to build on greyfield sites, brownfield, and putting brownfield first are essential to try to tackle this huge problem. I'd like to give a short example, if I may, from my own experience as a local councillor. One of the hardest things I ever had to do as a councillor was to try to help families who'd been moved out after no-fault evictions. It was absolutely and utterly heartbreaking seeing families with both parents in work struggling to find a new place to live after being moved out by a landlord. And that is the sort of measure, that is the sort of issue that measures in the King's Speech will tackle. And it's absolutely essential, in my opinion, that we take this forward and deal with these really pressing social problems which affect us across the country and which are so dreadful for so many families across this country of ours, and in particular in many towns and cities represented on this side of the House. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to draw out a number of other measures which I think are particularly important to my residents and to others across the country, and in particular the Government's commitment to legislate on knife crime. I have experienced appalling cases in my own area, including the dreadful murder of a 13-year-old boy. I can only say that my heart goes out to any family affected by this appalling crime, and the measures announced to tackle this through much tougher action on knives and also better support for teenagers are absolutely essential, and I would hope would be welcomed across the House. I'd also like to make a point in support of GB Energy. The Government is absolutely right to look at a new way to try to increase investment in green energy. We face an unprecedented crisis in the climate emergency. We must take action, and it's simply vital that we move forward on this matter. With rail renationalisation, again, this is something that will make a huge difference to thousands and thousands of residents who I represent, and indeed people across the country. And I have to say also, I would like to echo many members' support for rail and for public transport, and the very important role it takes in connecting people across this country. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to thoroughly endorse and encourage the Government's action to promote football regulation, which is long overdue. There was some good work carried out under the previous government, and it's very important that this continues. And I do hope that this will support and help many clubs across the country struggling with enormous challenges, including my own team, Reading Football Club. And I do look forward to hearing more on this later. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am conscious of time. I do want to congratulate the many new members who've spoken so eloquently today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I call Alison Griffiths to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to have followed so many excellent maiden speeches today. I have been taking notes. It is a great honour to deliver my maiden speech as the Member of Parliament for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton. But first, let me thank my wonderful association, my campaign team, and all of those, too numerous to mention, who have helped me on my journey to this place today. And let me also thank everyone who I shall work with in the future in the service of the people of Littlehampton and Bognor Regis. Allow me to introduce my wonderful constituency. Bognor Regis has the accolade of having the most sunshine hours in Britain. William Blake, who lives down the road in Felpham, encapsulated this when he wrote, "Heaven opens here, on all sides, her golden gates." For residents, they can easily see that Blake's reference to England's green and pleasant land was surely inspired by his life here. On the other side of the River Arun, Littlehampton is renowned for its rich nautical heritage. The harbour is central to the town's identity, and the presence of the Ashton-under-Lyne lifeboat station underscores the importance of maritime safety. Rustington adds further to our rich tapestry. Now home to Blind Veterans UK, Rustington is a model of community cohesion and local enterprise. Its thriving high street, supported by local businesses, is a testament to what can be achieved when we invest in our towns and villages. Bognor Regis and Littlehampton is a mosaic of vibrant villages and communities, from Aldwych and Rose Green to the rural charm of Yapton and the scenic settings of Middleton-on-Sea and Elmer, the industrious spirit of Wick and the agricultural heritage of Ford add to our picturesque patchwork. The beauty of Climping and the residential tranquillity of Felpham play a vital role in my constituency's identity. My predecessor, Nick Gibb, served Bognor Regis and Littlehampton for 27 years with great distinction. His dedication to public service and to our constituents has set a particularly high standard, as many have told me. And in this place and in government, his reforms to education have improved the lives of an entire generation, providing our children with the opportunities they need to succeed. But today, I stand before you to discuss an issue of utmost importance to my constituents: opposition to inappropriate development and the preservation of our green spaces. These areas are not just stretches of land. They are the lungs of our communities. They play a crucial role in combating climate change by acting as carbon sinks and promoting biodiversity, by contributing to our national food security, and by providing essential green spaces for recreation, wildlife habits, and natural flood defences. In Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, these floodplains and green spaces are the very foundations of our local economic ecosystem. Our constituency has already taken more than its fair share of development and has felt the adverse impacts as a consequence. Increased frequent flooding, exacerbated sewage discharges into the very sea upon which our tourist industry depends, our best beaches closed for swimming, and the destruction of natural habitats. One of my goals is to secure the right community infrastructure to support the growing population in the homes which have already been built. It's not enough to build new homes. We must also invest in the necessary infrastructure, such as schools, healthcare, wastewater treatment, and transport links, to provide a high quality of life for all of our constituents. I oppose government plans for top-down mandatory housing targets. These targets disregard local constraints, imposing unrealistic demands on our communities. Instead, I advocate for a more localised approach to planning, where decisions are made with meaningful input from local residents and authorities. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am deeply honoured to represent the people of Bognor Regis and Littlehampton in this House. I am humbled by the trust and confidence that the people of our community have placed in me, and I pledge to serve them with integrity and dedication. Hear, hear. Let us all together rise to meet the soaring challenges ahead. And on that, I invoke the words of William Blake one last time. Great things are done when men and mountains meet.
Hear, hear.
I call Joe Morris to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the member for Bognor and Regis, Bognor and Littlehampton. As the representative of the largest constituency in England, I share a concern for rural communities. I share a dedication to them, and I'm the product of one of them. I'd first of all like to thank the people of the Hexham constituency for placing their faith in me in this July and for sending me as their representative to this place. For many, it was their first time voting for my party, and I stand here as the first ever Labour MP for the Hexham constituency. It's an honour I'll never forget. I'll work as hard as I can to repay that faith in the days, the months and the years ahead. I also want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Guy Opperman, who, having contested an election against him, I know, despite the fact that we disagree on many things, was an incredibly decent man, who I was pleased to get to know a little bit during the campaign, and I know that I have very high bar set as a constituency MP as well. He's someone who is considered on all sides of the House to be an honourable man and a good public servant, and I know that it'll be very hard to match his legacy. I'd also like to depart a little bit from tradition and pay tribute to some of my predecessors as Labour candidates in the constituency who fought an often thankless task for 100 years in giving the people of Hexham a Labour alternative to vote for. People like Ian McMinn, who until July was the closest we'd ever come to winning the constituency, and whose daughter Kirsty proposed me as the youth officer at my first ever meeting of the Labour Party. I also like to welcome the areas that were added to the constituency, residents of Callerton and Throckley, who've been fantastically represented by the Honourable Member for Newcastle North for many years. I hope to continue giving that same service to Kenton Bank Foot, to Throckley, Newburn, Callerton, Woolsington and Walbottle, while Long Horsley previously had both my honourable friend, the member for Wansbeck, and the former member for Berwick-upon-Tweed representing that ward, both of whom served communities in Hepskirk, Morpeth, Stob Hill Estate, Long Horsley and Felton in their way, and were great servants to those communities. Now, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the education I received at Queen Elizabeth High School, Hexham Middle School or the Seal First School in Hexham, from teachers like Alison Higgs, Robin Hodnett, Leanne Clarkson and Tony Webster. Now, I know, Mr Deputy Speaker, that a great state education has the ability to change lives and to lift and change entire areas. I want every child in the constituency to have access to the kind of education that I was lucky enough to have. Now, although Hexham constituency is named for the town of Hexham, a town that boasts a wonderful abbey that's welcomed worshippers and visitors for over 1,300 years. In that time, it's suffered raids, including the forces of William Wallace. We've also got one of the first ever purpose-built jails in England, and we've got a farmers' mart that is at the heart of our rural economy. But the constituency I represent is much more than just one town. We extend from the Cumbrian border, where the Honourable Member for Carlisle and I each represent half of the village of Gilsland, through the Tyne Valley, across to Callerton and Throckley and Newcastle. In the north, we border Scotland, taking in Kielder Forest, where rather aptly for England's largest constituency by area, we have England's largest forest, and we're home to the largest man-made lake in Northern Europe, with almost 580 square miles of internationally renowned dark sky, and the Northumberland National Park. We then go to our southern border, where the Allen Valleys take in some of the most stunning scenery in England. We take in the Tyne Valley line, Wylam, Prudhoe, Stocksfield, Riding Mill, Hexham, Hayden Bridge and Haltwhistle. We take in Ponteland and Darras Hall, and areas as diverse as Slaley and Slaggyford. We've got the UNESCO World Heritage Site, Hadrian's Wall, running through the constituency. I'm in the unfortunate position, though, honourable members, of being the first ever MP for Hexham constituency to not be able to take visitors to see the iconic Sycamore Gap, which we so sadly lost to future generations last year. But the wall remains, as does the beauty that's drawn thousands of tourists to the constituency throughout the year, supporting the local economy in towns like Haltwhistle, which is the centre of Britain, Bellingham, Kielder, Wark, Burness and Otterburn. I do hope to see honourable members from across the House walking the awe-inspiring Hadrian's Wall, enjoying the wonders of our dark skies, gazing at the beautiful Tyne Valley from the train, or taking in the joys of community life at events like Ovingham's Goose Fair or the Northumberland County Show. With that being said, it's no surprise for many members and friends, and for the Secretary of State for the Environment, who I was delighted to welcome to the constituency during the election campaign, that my constituency will conjure images of the agricultural sector. We have a fantastic farming community. It's been my privilege to engage with them and get to know them over the election campaign. And I know that the farming community represents the beating heart of our constituency's identity. I look forward to working with him and with his ministers and with friends across the House to improve outcomes for UK farmers, for our consumers, and to address the challenges that they face. Now, as well as our agricultural sector, we also have a large manufacturing base in the constituency. We've got sites like Egger in Hexham, who have a firm focus on sustainability of the wood-based material manufacturing sector, and Essity in Prudhoe, who produce over 800 million toilet rolls per year, which means that when you're doing your shopping, odds are that you're elbowing someone out for some of Prudhoe's finest produce. I've worked in the steel sector previously, and I know how important it is to be a country that makes things, and how important well-skilled, well-paid, highly skilled jobs are to communities like ours. I should say that alongside our larger manufacturing base, we also have a thriving scene of small and craft breweries across the constituency, and I was delighted to take a break from the campaign trail to attend the Corbridge Beer Festival, which is all about raising money for good causes and charities. But while there's a lot of beauty in the constituency, there's huge challenges as well. We have a great local health service, but I see every single week the need for long-term solutions to the social care crisis, as elderly residents of isolated rural communities are doubly disadvantaged. They're hit by the rural cost of living premium, they're hit by poor public transport, and they're reliant on carers who themselves are struggling to make ends meet. We also face an acute transport challenge, and I think I'm the third person to cite George Stephenson in my maiden speech today, as he was in fact born in Wylam. Buses in the constituency are too infrequent, trains too regularly cancelled. In Gilsland, we have a train station that I'll be continuing my predecessor's campaign to see reopened, and I look forward to working with friends across the House to improve transport for our rural communities, and with my good friend Kim McGuinness, our North East Mayor as well. We also face a dramatic housing shortage in my constituency, with too many elderly people being unable to downsize from their homes into more appropriate ones in communities that they know, and with young people being forced to move away from where they grew up. For towns like Barrisford and Humshoff and larger towns such as Ponteland, this is a generational challenge. It's a huge concern for parents and grandparents, and it's something that came up time and time again on the doors during the general election. Now, crime and antisocial behaviour also impacts communities across West Newcastle, across the towns and the villages, all to the smallest and most isolated communities. These are matters that I look forward to working with Susan Dungworth, our Police and Crime Commissioner, on, but also working on the cross-departmental rural crime strategy that is so important. And I remember speaking to sheep farmers out in West Woodburn who'd been struck by the attempted robbery of their quad bike in particular. And also our rivers. The North East in general, we're famous for our rivers, but the Tyne is one of the most important rivers in our history as a country. It was the very artery of our industry. One of the demands of the constituents that came up wherever I went was that we clean up our rivers, and I'm pleased to see that the government has already got to work on delivering that promise. I look forward to supporting that as much as I can. Now, during the course of the election, every single door that I knocked on, I got the message for change. And I do know that it's incredibly important to get on with that change, to support the King's speech, support a confident, outward-looking nation that we can so evidently be. I'm conscious that we can't work miracles in this place, and I know that as the first ever Labour MP for the constituency, I've not been sent with an overnight expectation of success. I've been sent to get on with work, to work across the House and to work with colleagues to deliver genuine outcomes and genuine change for the people of the constituency. So I look forward to continuing in that service. Thank you.
Caroline notes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman from Hexham, and I would like to thank him for his fulsome tribute to his predecessor, Guy Opperman, who was loved on all sides of the House. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I learnt very early on in my political career, in 1999, when I was first elected a councillor, and my dad told me that there was nothing in politics quite as vexed as the politics of the Southern Area Planning Committee of Test Valley Borough Council. Now, he was right. I want to reassure the honourable gentleman opposite, who is going to have to respond, that actually that's a council which has already modernised its planning committee. It has already taken great strides, and until the nitrate issue in the Solent hit us, it was also one of the councils that was delivering the highest number of houses in the country. But it is a council that has faced challenges, and I really welcome the announcement around compulsory purchase orders and the changes that might come, but we need detail on them. So I seek from the ministers opposite a reassurance that that detail will come and it will give real powers to local authorities. Because Test Valley Borough Council has faced a challenge since 1982, when the Romsey Brewery started its last brew. I was at school at the local primary school. I remember the smell well. But that brewery site has an extant planning permission which has not been built out in the last 40 years. It's a phenomenal shame to the town that every time the local council has tried to put in a successful compulsory purchase order, the developer has simply started one more unit of accommodation to delay that from happening. I know, Mr Deputy Speaker, you might be familiar given the part of the country you're from, but it's Stanborough Developments who bring that curse to Romsey, and it has also meant that we have a brownfield site in the middle of the town with an extant planning permission which has simply never been finished. That could be providing homes for local people. Now, I can vividly remember back in 2019 when my right honourable friend, my former right honourable friend, the member for Guildford, the great Anne Milton, had a Westminster Hall debate on this subject. It was the first occasion in which I had the dubious honour of trying to chair a debate and speak in the same debate when she raised this issue. At that time, the former member for Stockton North, Alex Cunningham, made the comment that the Labour Party would bring forward penalties on this sort of developer. So I'm looking for that reassurance this afternoon that where there is an extant planning permission, I absolutely appreciate this requires retrospective legislation, the Labour government will seek to hold good the promises made by Mr Cunningham, and we can see developers like Stanborough suitably punished. I would like to provide the reassurance to colleagues that I'm not going to bang on about Greenbelt this afternoon, and that's for one good reason. That's because there is no Greenbelt in Hampshire, save for a tiny corner in the very southwest, which, as my right honourable friend will know, is designed to prevent the spread of the urban conurbation of Bournemouth, which is an entirely different county. We'd love some Greenbelt, but we simply don't have any. But what we do have is an area that is under extreme water stress. You cannot let off the brakes on building without also considering where the drinking water is going to come from. The Abbotswood development in my constituency frequently has to have tankers delivering water to the development because Southern Water repeatedly fail in their duty to provide water. But they're not exclusively to blame because the current rules mean that water companies, whilst they can be consulted on development, have no right to say no. Have no ability to simply say we cannot deliver the water to this development, and in areas like the Solent that is going to become increasingly challenging. I saw from the pages of the Daily Mail that the expectation is that Southern Hampshire will take an enormous amount of development under this government's plans. They cannot do that if those homes cannot have a water supply. I will of course give way.
Infrastructure and the need of that to go alongside proper infrastructure alongside development. In the Basin-Billericay constituency, around Burston, Billericay and Leindon, there's also a lot of concern around huge infrastructure going in without that local consent as well. Is this another issue that her constituents are facing as well?
Well, absolutely. And infrastructure to make new developments work is absolutely key. But also what we need is communities taken along hand in hand. We have heard this afternoon about villages up and down the country. They are the heart of our rural communities. Now, in Romsey and Southampton North, there have been many villages have worked incredibly hard. They've got their neighbourhood development plans in place. They've held local referendums to confirm that. And they are now scared that that work will go to waste. So yet again, I seek reassurance from ministers opposite that that work will be upheld, it will be cherished, because that gives us the scale and the type of communities that we wish to see going forward. And when you have involved local people in the process, please don't turn around to them and say that your views were irrelevant and we're going to do this to you anyway. There are, in the minute I have left, just a couple of further points I wish to make. I have had, over the course of the last 48 hours, a number of issues pop into my inbox. First and foremost, there is still a problem with the quality of new builds. When you throw houses up at speed, you sometimes are left with significant build quality problems, including one gentleman emailed me yesterday who has had to spend £350,000. Fortunately, it was insured to rectify the developer's problems. We've seen houses, sometimes in my constituency, torn down because the build quality hasn't been good enough. Let us make sure that we do not see a repeat of that. And please, whilst we're talking about new build estates, can we solve the issues of estate management companies ripping off homeowners, not bringing up estates to the quality that they're needed in order to get adopted? I can see the Honourable Lady opposite is taking that on her shoulders. She should believe me, I will be beating a path to her door, because there is much that still needs to be done to make sure that our housing that is delivered is of a quality that is good enough for people to live in.
Elsie Blundell to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to make my maiden speech during this debate. I am so proud to represent Harewood and Middleton North. It is a new constituency, comprised partly of Rochdale and most of the former Harewood and Middleton seat, both in Greater Manchester. People from my constituency have long shaped our parliamentary democracy. Harewood is the birthplace of Peter Harewood, famous for apprehending Guy Fawkes in the cellars beneath Parliament in 1605. Middleton, too, has a famous son in Sam Bamford, the radical social reformer who led a contingent of weavers from Middleton into Manchester in 1819. Their peaceful protest for political representation ended in massacre at St Peter's Field. Spotland, in the Rochdale part of my constituency, is home to a stone road, widely known as Cotton Famine Road, a monument to cotton workers who lived there in the 1860s and who bravely sided with the Union cause during the American Civil War. This was a selfless act, especially as the Union side at that time was preventing goods from leaving Confederate ports. This resulted in a shortage of cotton supplies, a cotton famine, and caused unemployment, poverty and hardship across Lancashire. But support for President Lincoln and his pledge to end the slave trade held firm. The workers' campaign was supported by Rochdale statesman and radical John Bright, of whom a sculpture can be found in the lower waiting hall of Westminster Palace. Bright was a lifelong campaigner against slavery and is especially well known for his role in abolishing the Corn Laws, alongside another great parliamentarian, Richard Cobden, who, with apologies to my honourable friend the member for Rochdale, I will claim as a predecessor, Mr Deputy Speaker, as large parts of what was his constituency now fall under Harewood and Middleton North boundaries. The history of the area I represent, then, is strongly linked to many political and social reforms in this country and around the world, to ideas and values that we hold close to this day, that there is no place for violence in our politics, that the circumstances a person is born into must not prevent them from participating in our democracy, and that, as those cotton workers knew in the 1860s, we should be compassionate to all people, regardless of race, class or any other distinction. Alongside Harewood, Middleton and Spotland, I have the privilege of representing the former mill town of Castleton, with its proud history of manufacturing and engineering, and the fantastic villages of Bamford and Nordham. My constituency was also home to renowned architect Edgar Wood, who is widely recognised as the most advanced English architect of his time. And more recently, Harewood was the birthplace of Ian Simpson, whose buildings, as one half of Simpson Huff Partners, like Beetham Tower and One Blackfriars, compel people to look up to the skylines in both Manchester and London. To this day, it is the people of Harewood and Middleton North who continue to make the place great, and I would like to use this speech to pay tribute to some of them. To retail workers like Robert and Bender Bell from Harewood, who are also proud trade unionists, for whom the Employment Rights Bill set out in the King's Speech will create extra rights to work flexibly and make parental leave, sick pay and protection from unfair dismissal day one rights. This government will also ban 0 hours contracts and fire and rehire. And to the many volunteers, like the Pullen family, who run the first Harewood Scouts group, Howard Borden and Simon Bennett, and the excellent work they do, including through the Friends of Jubilee Park group and St Edmund's Church, and Pete Knowles and his group of volunteers at Stony Hill Community Wildlife Area, who protect and promote our beautiful meadows and woodlands and make sure children in a relatively urban area can access nature too. People like these make my constituency great, and I will do everything I can to support them. I would also like to pay tribute at this point to my predecessors. Chris Clarkson has represented the people of Harewood and Middleton for the last 4.5 years. I know that many members of this House valued his good humour and enjoyed working alongside him, including on the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee. Liz McInnes was the MP for Harewood and Middleton between 2014 and 2019 and served in 2 shadow ministerial roles. Liz worked incredibly hard in both of those positions and was a fierce advocate for her constituents on many issues, including the NHS, where she previously worked. Mr Deputy Speaker, for the last 7 years I have enjoyed a career in transport planning. I am incredibly pleased by the measures set out in the King's speech to accelerate infrastructure delivery and to improve our transport network. Unfortunately, many people in my constituency do not have access to the opportunities and jobs they need, as Harewood and Middleton, despite their location in the great modern city region of Greater Manchester, are 2 of the largest towns in the northwest of England not to be served by a rail station or Metrolink tram stop. As one former Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, argued in a recent paper, there has been too little transport investment in low productivity areas like mine. We need to improve transport connectivity throughout city regions like Greater Manchester, and this is because good transport infrastructure allows more frequent interaction between people and it creates larger pools of workers for businesses. Earlier this month, we received promising news from Greater Manchester Combined Authority of a recommitment to linking Middleton into Greater Manchester's Metrolink network and of progress on plans for Harewood's tram train connection. In future, this will form part of the city region's integrated transport network, which Greater Manchester must carry on delivering at pace to boost productivity, pay, jobs and living standards in Harewood and Middleton North. Finally then, when it comes to devolution for our city region, the job is well underway, but we must be mindful of the fact that it is not yet finished. I look forward to supporting our new government because I know that through the English Devolution Bill and other measures, it will put power back into the hands of working people and money back into their pockets, and that it will strive to ensure that powerful forces are not able to disenfranchise them again. Throughout history, my constituents have had too much experience of that. I will end here and thank Honourable and Right Honourable members for their attention, and thank you, Mr Speaker, for allowing me to make my first contribution.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I say to the Honourable Lady, welcome. What a wonderful speech that she gave. It was very interesting to hear about the constituency of Harewood and Middleton North. I must confess, I didn't know much about the constituency before, but I certainly know much about it now. And I also think it was very generous of the Honourable Lady to pay rightful compliments to her predecessor, Chris Clarkson, who's much missed on this side of the House. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Labour Party won a mandate a couple of weeks ago, and it won a mandate for the manifesto that it put before the British electorate, and we respect that. This is part of our British parliamentary system. We respect the peaceful transfer of power. But I do have to say gently to the Labour government today that it is concerning that the King's speech and the subsequent comments made by ministers have rejected the notion that local communities should be at the heart of developments within their area. Now, there is one particular issue affecting my constituency of South Leicestershire, and that is the proposed Hinckley National Rail Freight Interchange. And on the 8th of July, the new Chancellor stated that she would ask the Secretaries of State for Transport, who will make the decision on this rail freight interchange, and Energy Security and Net Zero, to, quote, prioritise decisions on infrastructure projects that have been sitting unresolved for far too long, end of quote. She doesn't, of course, explain what she meant by sitting unresolved for far too long. But let me help the new Chancellor and let me help the new front bench. Because when comments are made about sitting unresolved for too long, that perhaps is an unfortunate euphemism. What it should actually say is that in our system of laws, we respect and listen to local communities. We listen to stakeholder groups. We listen to neighbourhood groups. And of course, local authorities, elected councillors, are in most instances of planning the ones whose remit it is to make these decisions. But on the issue of the Hinckley National Rail Freight interchange, can I say that South Leicestershire already has its fair share of developments? It has one of the largest housing developments in Leicestershire with New Lovisthorpe. And it has the doubling of Magna Park, which is one of the largest logistics parks in Europe. It has Bruntingthorpe Aerodrome, which plays host to many industrial activities. It has the prospect of a new village, Whetstone Gorse or Western Pastures. So it's not a case of NIMBYism in South Leicestershire for the objections that have been heard about the Hinckley National Rail Freight interchange. It's about the fact that there are 5 other rail freight interchanges within a radius of 30 miles of South Leicestershire. And I'm glad that the new Deputy Prime Minister has taken a seat to listen to my speech about this matter. But it's important that the Labour government don't just listen to me or my constituents, but they listen to Leicestershire County Council. They listen to Warwickshire County Council. They even listen to Labour-led Rugby Council, who have all raised issues with the planning process for this unwelcome proposal.
Of course. Friend confirm that this decision is now with a Labour minister to decide at a national level, overriding those local concerns.
Well, the honourable member for Billericay is quite right. This is a decision now that rests with the new Labour government to make. So I'm afraid Labour councillors or other Labour activists who might have opposed the Hinckley National Rail Freight interchange, they should be looking now to their Labour Party colleagues in government who will be making this decision within a matter of a few weeks. And I would urge the government to listen to the people of South Leicestershire, listen to the stakeholders that I've mentioned, listen to the people of Elmsthorpe and Sapcut and Sharnford and Aston Flamville and Stony Stanton, and also the residents of my honourable friend for Bosworth in Hinckley, who himself has made some valuable comments against the proposed rail freight interchange. This is a deeply unwelcome proposal. So I want to offer a solution to the new Labour government. Before it recommends for approval this unwelcome development, can I suggest that the relevant minister meet with me and with the stakeholders, including Labour-run Rugby Council, to discuss the proposal and perhaps look at drafting a national planning framework for the proper location of these rail freight interchanges, and not just ride roughshod, as a constituent of mine emailed me only 2 hours ago to say, which is what his fear, as is my fear, that the Labour government will do with the views of the people of South Leicestershire.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Better put my specs on, I wasn't quite right. Can I just say, it's a great honour to be in the Chamber today and to hear so many wonderful maiden speeches, especially those of my North East colleagues, who've made me very proud today, and I think they're going to be fantastic representatives of all the constituents. This is my 5th election to Westminster, but my constituency has changed, with only 4 wards from my former North Tyneside constituency and 6 wards added from Newcastle upon Tyne East. And I thank the people of my former North Tyneside constituency for giving me the honour of serving them for the past 14 years. And I also thank the people of the new constituency for placing their trust in me at the general election. I will work hard to honour that trust. Voters in the former Newcastle upon Tyne East constituency were fortunate to be represented for 41 years by the Right Honourable Nick Brown, who commanded great respect in this House. Constituents hold him in high regard for all his work and achievements in both the constituency and as a minister in the last Labour government. He has earned his well-deserved retirement. But personally, I'm grateful to Nick for all his help and friendship. Across my new constituency, people face the same challenges: the cost of living crisis, the shortage of good social housing, hikes in mortgages and diminished public services, and they've all taken the toll on people's everyday lives. My constituency is crying out for this Labour government's shared mission of renewal, and I share the view of our North East Mayor, Kim in being in full support of the new English devolution bill. Kim believes that in her office she will be delivering the arm of the Labour mission in the North East and is keen to start on that apace. And while I know it won't be easy, I have great hope that the announcements made in the King's speech will start to turn the tide and make life better for everyone in this country. Because I was a ward councillor for 15 years in North Tyneside before I entered this house, I do have a self-confessed bias for North Tyneside Council. The Council's Planning Committee has not voted against officers' recommendations on any medium or large house building sites for over a decade. It has an up-to-date local plan and has ambitious housing targets of its own, yet it still has sites stuck in the planning system. And this is because, although national highways agreed within the local plan that strategic sites should proceed and should be accommodated on the road infrastructure, when it came to planning applications being submitted, National Highways placed a holding objection on the sites, leading to 5,000 new homes being stuck in the system. I ask that, alongside dealing with other planning reform issues, the ministers will look at the impact of statutory consultees on delays in the planning system to help authorities like North Tyneside. The Health Equals Campaign Coalition, made up of 27 organisations, has launched a visually thought-provoking campaign, Make Health Equal, to highlight that levels of poverty and deprivation lead to people in parts of my constituency and other such areas living 16 years less than people in more affluent parts of the country. The Coalition acknowledges that the King's speech will start to repair some of the building blocks of health, such as decent and secure housing, good work opportunities and clean transport, and it hopes it can look to the government to assess the impact of the King's speech on health inequalities and, in the spirit of unity, work with groups like theirs to deliver the mission in my constituency and across the country. I would also like to make a plea on behalf of the offshore energy industries. While we will need the new Great British Energy Bill is something that's welcomed, we must not lose sight that oil and gas play a massive part in our economy and will continue to do so. And I'd also quickly say, with the Vapes and Tobacco Bill, that I hope this government, unlike the previous government, will take into account the views of the industry. And in closing, I will just say very quickly, I look forward to supporting the King's speech in the voting lobby, along with my 411 colleagues and hopefully members of the opposition, and in so doing will vote for an agenda fixed on making the lives of everyone in this country far better.
Yeah. I call Lewis Cocking to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for calling me to make my maiden speech. And before I begin, I just want to congratulate all new members today which have made their maiden speeches. I'm a geographer by background, so it's an absolute privilege to sit here and learn about all of the different parts of our lovely United Kingdom. It is truly the honour of my life to stand here as the Member of Parliament for Broxbourne. I'm under no illusion about the responsibility of representing the place where I was raised, where my family live, and where I call home. I'm hugely grateful to the residents of Broxbourne who put their faith in me and elected one of their own. They will be keeping me on my toes, not least of all, I can assure you all, of my nan, Mr Deputy Speaker. She will not hesitate to badger me if she thinks I need to get things sorted. We are straight talkers in Broxbourne, and chief among them was my predecessor, Sir Charles Walker. Yeah. He was certainly not afraid to speak his mind in this chamber. More than a decade ago, I was lucky enough to do some work experience in Sir Charles's office here in Parliament. I simply would not be here today without the opportunities and wisdom he offered over the years. Sir Charles has had a number of triumphs in Broxbourne, and I was grateful to join him and our community in our efforts to save the Cheshunt Urgent Care Centre in 2011 and to stop the energy from waste facility in Hodgson in 2017. I've also joined him on many occasions out on the doorstep, and the December 2019 general election campaign particularly sticks in mind. Despite the darkness and the cold, the ever-enthusiastic Sir Charles would plough on. On one occasion, it was just the two of us, and all of a sudden, Charles slipped and fell. I gasped and said, "Charles, please don't injure yourself when you're just with me, or they'll be saying I did that to get the seat." Sir Charles served Broxbourne for 19 years, and although I knew him well, I've come to understand just how much of an impact he had on this house only in the short time since my election. Yeah. As chair of the Procedure Committee and later the Administration Committee, Sir Charles championed the institution of Parliament and the individuals that make it. This has been really made clear to me by the reactions of House staff when they discover I'm representing Broxbourne. I will do my utmost to follow him in taking my responsibilities of scrutiny and representation seriously. As I've said, Mr Deputy Speaker, Broxbourne is my home and the place I love. The constituency is characterised by both its closeness to London and the countryside, with the Leigh Valley Regional Park on our doorstep. In 2012, Broxbourne became an Olympic borough. We hosted the canoe events at our world-class Leigh Valley Whitewater Rafting Centre, and we have a gold post box in Cheshunt, thanks to our very own Laura Kenny's success in the cycling. There are a number of Team GB athletes with connections to Broxbourne heading to the Summer Olympics, and I wish them all the best. The area has many small independent businesses, particularly around our towns of Waltham Cross, Cheshunt and Hodgson. They are the backbone of Broxbourne's local economy, and I will do all I can to support entrepreneurship at every level. I'm also proud of the international investment coming to the constituency over the next few years. I'm pleased to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Hollywood is coming to Broxbourne. A £700 million project to build a film studio complex is well underway, and this will have capacity to produce 4 blockbusters at the same time.
We've only got one.
At this election, the constituency of Broxbourne took on the villages of Stansted Abbots, St Margaret's, Hertford Heath, Great Amwell and Brickenden. These are all known for their tight-knit communities and natural beauty. Which brings me on to the topic of this debate. Whilst preparing for this speech, I noticed that both the former MPs for Broxbourne referenced the unsport greenbelt we are lucky to have in our area. Broxbourne has a local plan and has built hundreds of new homes. Some of my constituents would argue too many in a short space of time and too many in total, and I would tend to agree. As many of you who are councillors will have seen if you've sat on the planning committee, developers use outline planning permission to promise the world. I've seen houses in outline look absolutely amazing. The development has schools, new roads, a local centre, healthcare facilities, but once outline planning permission has been granted, they come forward for full planning permission, and Mr Speaker, let me tell you, 9 times out of 10, the application looks incredibly different. Bad design and no infrastructure, and developers wonder why residents go up in arms. We need to link in better the NHS to new developments. On several occasions, getting local NHS providers to tell us what they need, or to even get them round the table so we can plan new services for my constituents, has been a real struggle. I have a real issue in Goffsoak and the wider West Cheshunt area, which has seen a lot of new housing, but no new healthcare facilities. And it is plainly obvious to everyone living there that they are desperately needed. We must ensure developments are acceptable. Not development but anywhere, but appropriate development in the right places. Infrastructure must come first. New schools, GP surgeries and 106 monies up front or as close to day one as possible. Above all else, we must ensure that local people have a say over local development in their area. So I hope the government will listen to local people. On this and other issues, I assure my constituents that I will be their voice in this place, and I hope I can begin to repay their trust as my hard work starts now.
Yes. I call Peter Prinsley to make his maiden speech.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm a surgeon from East Anglia, and it's the honour beyond my imagining to have been elected to Parliament to serve the people of Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket in the most beautiful county of Suffolk. I thank their voters for putting their faith in me and in Labour, and to have given us the chance to change Britain. I'm the first ever Labour Member of Parliament for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, which has been a Conservative seat for nigh on 150 years. I must thank my predecessor, Jo Churchill, most sincerely for her long service to the constituents. I am the first ear, nose and throat surgeon ever elected to Parliament. I am not, however, the first member of my family to be an MP. As a small boy in the 1960s, I recall my uncle George Jager, who was the member for Goole in the East Riding of Yorkshire. I thank my teachers at Gisborough Grammar School in Cleveland. And as a descendant of Jewish refugees, what a pleasure it was to hear my now honourable friend from Middlesbrough deliver his maiden speech. I went to medical school in Sheffield, and I thank many of the surgeons who've trained me in the NHS. I thank the thousands of patients that have treated me over my career, that I have treated over my career, and who put their faith in me and have been my lasting inspiration. Indeed, one of the very first people I met as I walked into Parliament was one of my patients, Paul, from Great Yarmouth, who works right here in this place to keep us all safe. I thank my family, and in particular my wife Marian, the former Sheriff of Norwich, who's been my greatest supporter and first encouraged me in politics. Now, my constituency of Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket is a wonderful part of the world, with a rich tradition of agriculture and food production. We are home to Green King, and according to the records in the House of Commons Library, one of my distinguished predecessors had urged the House Bar to stop the delicious beer created from Suffolk barley. And I see the present Green King brew in the Strangers Bar is called Level Head, something we are all going to need in the years to come as we begin to rebuild Britain. We are also home to Silver Spoon, and the enormous Suffolk sugar beet production is key to our local economy. And in Stowmarket, we have a brilliant food museum to showcase that most essential of national services, farming. I was delighted to see our new government's proposals to sort out our buses. Let's think of them as crucial services they are and support them. There are villages in my constituency which have 2 buses a day during the school term and no buses at all in the school holidays. How does anyone with no car get to the GP surgery or to the pharmacy in the nearby town? Now, very, very few surgeons are ever elected to Parliament, and I will bring my experience of 42 years as an NHS doctor to Parliament, and to do something to help mend a service which my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, has described as broken. Many of our hospitals are indeed in poor repair, and we have seen very little progress on the 40 new hospitals famously promised by the last government. In Bury St Edmunds, we urgently need to confirm the capital funding to progress the replacement of the West Suffolk Hospital, which, like my own James Paget University Hospital in Great Yarmouth and our sister hospital in King's Lynn, is supported by thousands of scaffolding poles, literally falling down. Last week, it was reported that bird droppings had fallen through the roof onto the sterile surgical instruments. My predecessor was a strong advocate for the replacement of our hospital, and I will aim to continue her work. Our brilliant new government has much to do. Let's use our huge mandate wisely. Let's look after the staff who look after us. End the outrage of food banks for our nurses in many of our hospitals. Sort out the pay and the conditions of all who work in our most precious public services. Let's make the biggest employer in the land the very best employer in the land. Now, there are things to do to sort out social care and to end the financial lottery at the end of life which so many families fear. The answers to this are political, and we can do this. Our hospitals are full of patients with a non-medical condition called bed block, because they cannot be discharged safely in so many cases. I cannot begin to tell this House how many of my operating lists have been cancelled because of this problem. Whole surgical teams waiting around for hours and operating theatres lying empty. If we solve the problem of social care, we will not need to build ever bigger hospitals. But I am optimistic for our NHS. Britain leads the world in scientific advances, and right in my own region of East Anglia, we have world-beating biomedical science and leading universities. Recently, we celebrated 75 years of the NHS. My father, who if he were here alive today, would be astonished, was an RAF medic who joined the RAF in 1948, and my son is an A&E doctor right here in London. My sister is a nurse. My family has served the NHS continuously since it began. When the great Nye Bevan invented the NHS, a painful hip was treated with a walking stick, and a cataract with a thick pair of glasses. Now, the miracles of joint replacement and cataract surgery are no longer regarded as the surgical miracles they are, but as an entitlement. Nye would have been amazed. I am sure we will see in our own time scientific and medical advances beyond our imagination. Already we are at last seeing effective treatments for dementia and neurological disorders, genetic cures for haemophilia and other inherited problems. And we will have cancer vaccines and other marvels that we cannot yet imagine. I urge all of my honourable colleagues in this brand new Parliament to do whatever we can to support research and innovation with all our heart and all our souls. For as the great poet Seamus Heaney wrote, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. I commend this King's speech to the House.
Eve Barclay. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by congratulating the Secretary of State and ministerial team on their appointments and to wish them well, and also to pay tribute to the members for Chesterfield and Newport West who did a lot of the hard yards in opposition and have missed out this time on ministerial roles. Can I pay tribute to the excellent maiden speeches that we have heard across the House today? We started with the member for Bishop Auckland, who I was delighted to hear has significant areas of rural parts of his constituency and has an interest in this sector. We heard from the member for Edinburgh South, who gave the House an informed tour of his constituency. We had a fantastic speech from the member for Gordon and Buchan, who brings real practical experience, professional experience to rural affairs, and quite rightly focused on the need to tailor policies to the needs of rural communities. We heard from the new member for Middlesbrough South, who I thought was very generous in his tribute to his much-respected predecessor. We had a brilliant speech from the member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, who highlighted the importance of the rural economy, water quality, and what an asset that will be within the House that she will be. We heard from the member for Hexham, who talked about farming as the beating heart of his constituency. The member for Hayward and Middleton North, who spoke about the radicalism of Middleton, one of the former figures. I hope that will inform her relationship with the Government Whip's office moving forward. And we had two closing speeches which were outstanding. The member for Broxbourne, who spoke about the importance of infrastructure, within the rural economy, particularly focusing within that on planning, and the huge experience that is respected across the House that the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stonemarket brings as a surgeon. And I know he will be an important voice in health debates, amongst others, moving forward. And I'm delighted all those new members chose the issue of rural affairs in the King's Speech in which to make their maiden speeches. Now, Labour campaigned on a slogan of change, but they are only offering uncertainty to farming and fishing communities. Now, it's no surprise that just last night, the President of the National Farming Union said that farmers are facing a cliff edge and are being kept up at night by this uncertainty. Now, this uncertainty is not because the Labour government hasn't had time to prepare its policies for farming and fishing. It's because it is not a priority for a Labour government. That is why the Labour manifesto had just 87 words on farming and nothing at all on fishing. It's why this King's Speech has nothing for the farming and fishing communities. It's why they've not even given any dates for when this uncertainty will end. And we should be clear in this House that that is an active choice. It is a point of where Labour has chosen to prioritise, in contrast to the prioritisation we were willing to make with the additional funding that we have committed. And isn't it all the more ironic that just a few years ago, the now Prime Minister went to the NFU and admitted that farming and rural affairs had for too long been an afterthought for the Labour Party and promised to change that. An early example of promised change that is not then delivered. Now, we can see that uncertainty in the farming budget. They made no commitment to what the budget will be, whether they're continuing it, whether they'll increase it. Now, we were willing to make decisions to prioritise £1 billion additional funding over this Parliament. Nothing from Labour on that, leaving farmers uncertain. So can the Secretary of State confirm what his budget will be? Does he even know? Has the Chancellor told him? And can he even tell the House when he might know? Because we don't even know when the spending review will be. He's probably in the dark as much as the rest of us. What about the uncertainty on food security? We make commitments with the Food Security Index, the annual Farm to Fork Summit, the Food Security Duty, the biggest ever grants payment, the additional funding to deal with the wet weather that farmers had recently faced. But what is the commitment from the Labour government on food security? There's nothing in the King's Speech about legislating for that. So can he confirm whether they intend to legislate and it was just an omission that they didn't get round to, or is it something that he is now ruling out? Or what about the uncertainty on just how much farmland will be lost as a result of this government? Well, we know what their 2030 environmental targets are: to triple solar, to increase onshore wind, to increase the pylons connecting to offshore wind. Can he confirm to the House he will publish before the summer recess an impact assessment on how much farmland will be lost as a result of delivering his 2030 environmental targets? Or does he even know? Of course I do.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. One cornerstone of the Conservatives' manifesto was also for an underground first approach to new electricity pylons. And this is a really important matter for my constituents in Basildon and Billericay. Would he also highlight to the government exactly how important this is, and also try and seek an answer to them on what their proposals are in this space?
Right honourable friend goes to the nub of the issue, because if you're promising change, you need to be able to say what the timelines are. You need to say what the budget is. You need to say what legislation you're going to pass in order to deliver that, all of which is silent in this King's Speech. Now, their manifesto has lots of high-sounding things which are hard to disagree with, that they want more food security. Food security is national security. We agree on this side of the House. They say they want to raise animal welfare. We've done a huge amount to do so. That is fine. But if they say they want to end the badger cull, when are they going to do that? There's nothing in the King's Speech on that. So what are the timelines? Dairy farmers would like to know. Will he publish the analysis from the Chief Veterinary Officer on what the impact that will be on the trajectory. We know that the current approach has seen TB cases come down in England from 34,500 in 2018 to below 20,000. We also know, certainly the advice I had, that vaccinations would not be ready for some time. Will he publish the trajectory, and will he tell us when that cull will end? Well, of course we respect the science, and the point is, given that I assume he'll be getting the same, he chunters from a sedentary research, presume he will get the same briefs that I did. And the science brief, in a way he's making my question, the science brief that I got from the chief vet said that the vaccinations weren't ready and the cull was being effective. And in fact, you only need to look at Labour's policy in Wales to see the opposite is the case. So, representing Cambridge as he does, I hope he will follow the science. They made a commitment that doesn't follow the science. Perhaps this is the sort of change they mean, changing from what they committed to the professor to where they are. It didn't really take that long. Again, in terms of things that at a high level no one can disagree with, making more use of public sector procurement, again, is something on this side of the House not only did we agree with, we've even helped them by the former member for Colchester doing a fantastic review, the Quince review, looking at how that will be done. But they're silent on the funding of that. So is that going to be funded out of the Department of Health, the Department of Education budgets, the MOD, the local government budgets? Or is it going to come out of his budget, which is difficult for him to say because he doesn't even know what his budget is going to be? The reality, Mr Deputy Speaker, is we've got empty slogans from a party that does not care about the rural economy. They are not giving clarity to farming and fishing. They barely mention farming in their manifesto. They don't even mention fishing. This King's speech does nothing for the farming and fishing communities. And the decisions we've seen so far are ones that take vast amounts of farmland out of food production in order to prioritise the eco-zealotry of which we've heard so often in this House. So I hope today he will give some clarity that is sadly lacking in the King's speech as to what they will do and when on the budget, what they will do on food procurement, what clarity there will be to dairy farmers on the badger cull, and end the uncertainty that the President on the NFU and so many others within the farming and fishing community currently face.
Secretary of State Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's a huge honour to close the debate today on His Majesty's gracious speech, my first opportunity to speak from the dispatch box as the Secretary of State. And I would like to welcome my predecessor, now the Shadow Secretary of State, to his place, but also thank him for the way he worked with me very constructively previously. I look forward to that continuing, although, of course, I prefer it this way round. It's been an honour to be present for maiden speeches across the House. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go through their excellent comments in much detail, but I would like to mention the honourable members on our side for Bishop Auckland, Edinburgh South West, Cramlington and Killingworth, Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, Hexham, Haywood and Middleton North, Bury St Edmunds and Stowe Market, many of them, of course, representing rural constituencies, all of them showing what great assets they will be to this House, as well as to communities that they represent. Now, I cannot respond to everyone who has spoken. I'm sorry about that, but I will do my best to cover what I can in the very limited time that is available. And I'll start with the subject of planning. This government was elected on a mandate to get Britain building again. As the Deputy Prime Minister said, reforming the planning system is the key to unlocking our country's economic growth. The existing planning system is too restrictive, too slow and too uncertain, which undermines investor confidence and means the homes we desperately need do not get built. We will overhaul the planning system to tackle the chronic shortage of homes and power up the economy. Alongside this, we were elected on a platform to deliver for nature, taking urgent action to meet the Environment Act targets that the previous government missed. We will protect, create and improve spaces which increase climate resilience and promote nature's recovery on land and at sea, recognising that ensuring positive outcomes for nature is fundamental to unlocking the housing and infrastructure this country so urgently needs. And while we must take tough action to tackle the housing emergency and build the 1.5 million homes that we need over this Parliament, we remain committed to preserving the Greenbelt. Our brownfield-first approach means that authorities should prioritise brownfield sites, but brownfield development alone will not be enough. So we'll also transform lower-quality grey belt land, such as wasteland or old car parks, into housing, including affordable homes for those most in need. Now, rural communities... I'm sorry, there's not enough time before 2:30. Rural communities... Well, they should have spoken for less time then. Rural communities have been severely undermined by the previous Conservative government. For a party that once claimed to be the party of the countryside, their track record is one of abject and absolute neglect. Voters in the countryside rejected their failure and embraced Labour's positive vision. That is evident from the huge increase in Labour MPs now representing rural constituencies and the collapse in rural support for the Conservatives. Thanks to the party opposite, transport links in many rural areas are now close to non-existent. There are more potholes in England's roads than craters on the moon. Schools can't recruit enough teachers. GP surgeries are full. Families can't find an NHS dentist. Thousands of rural businesses have collapsed. Rural crime goes unpunished. This is an abandonment of the countryside on a historic scale. And yet, instead of apologising for their failure, the Conservatives instead choose to deny the reasons rural voters turned against them in their millions. They're at it again today. I take it from the comments the Shadow Secretary of State was making just now. They're so out of touch, they don't understand that rural communities want more affordable homes, more dentists, more teachers, more GPs, better public transport, energy security, more digital connectivity, well-paid jobs, better access to the countryside all around them, and their rivers cleaned up after the Tories left them swilling with raw, stinking, toxic sewage. They are out of touch. They're out of ideas, and now, thank goodness, they are out of office. This week, Britain starts a new chapter. Rural communities will be central to our mission to rebuild Britain, to fixing the issues that make a real difference to people's everyday lives. As we grow the economy, mend the NHS, fix our schools, tackle crime and address the cost of living crisis. With a decade of national renewal, this Labour government will serve the British public wherever they live. Now, the Prime Minister has been clear. This government's priority is to grow our economy. We will boost rural economies with our new deal for farmers, seek a veterinary deal with the EU to get food exports moving again after they locked them out, and we will stop farmers ever again being undercut by dodgy Tory trade deals that sell out Britain's environment and welfare standards as they sell out Britain's exporters and food producers. We will set up a new British Infrastructure Council to steer private investment into rural areas neglected by the Tories, including broadband rollout, and we'll reduce our exposure to volatile global fossil fuel prices, protecting farmers' energy bills against future price shocks. I'm very sorry, there's only 3 minutes left, and I need to cover the points that have been raised. We'll do that. They had their time. We'll do that by switching on GB Energy as we make Britain a green energy superpower. And we'll speed up building flood defences to protect rural homes and farms and rebuild our NHS with 40,000 more appointments every week, 8,500 more mental health professionals and a hub in every rural community to tackle loneliness and the mental health crisis. Order!
Steve.
The Right Honourable Lady has behaved abominably. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And that's not the end of their failure. We'll take back our streets from the criminals with the first ever cross-government rural crime strategy and more police patrols in rural towns and villages. And we'll break down barriers to opportunity in rural communities so our children can realise their ambitions wherever they grow up. They are the party of broken dreams. This is the party of aspiration. Now, Nature underpins all the government's missions. Without nature, there is no economy, no health, no food and no society. But nature is at crisis point. Absolutely. The Tories left Britain one of the most nature-depleted countries on earth. A third of our bird and mammal species faced extinction. Record levels of sewage are poisoning our rivers, lakes and seas. Reversing this catastrophe cannot happen overnight, but we have already turned the corner. This week, we introduced our Water Special Measures Bill to strengthen regulation and reverse the tide of sewage that is killing our waterways. Water bosses will no longer reward themselves with multi-million-pound bonuses that they allowed while they oversee record levels of water pollution. And if they refuse to clean up their toxic filth, they will face criminal charges. Last week, water companies signed up to my initial package of reforms, including ring-fencing funding for vital infrastructure investment, and if that money is not spent as it's intended to be, the companies will refund their customers. It will no longer be diverted for bonuses and dividends as they allowed it to be. 14 long years the Tories had to take action like this, but they failed absolutely. It took this government less than 1 week. That is what change looks like with Labour. This government is committed to legally binding environmental targets set under the Environment Act, targets the Tories missed, but this government will meet by working in a new partnership with the nature NGOs. Now, I would like to thank all honourable members who have taken part in this constructive and insightful debate today for their perceptive contributions and dedication to making progress on important matters. After 14 years of chaos, there is once again hope for our environment, hope for our countryside and hope for our rural communities. I welcome the King's speech. I recommend it to this House. Change has come after 14 years of chaos and failure.
Debate to be resumed what day?
Next Monday.
This Monday.